Alrighty, chat. So we had a slight problem. We tried to stream on Friday and our camera died. And so we tried to stream on Saturday. Things didn't really work out. So here we are. Apologies for the delay, but welcome to another Healthy Gamer GG stream. My name is Alok Kanoja. Just a reminder that even though I'm a psychiatrist, nothing we discuss on stream today is intended to be taken as medical advice. Everything is for educational or entertainment purposes only. And if y'all have a concern or question for realsies, please go see a licensed professional, right? So we are not a substitute for mental health treatment. What we are is we're going to teach y'all some about neuroscience, psychology, maybe psychiatry, maybe mental illness. So we're absolutely happy being educational, which is what we try to do here. And we hope to inspire you to do things for your mental and physical health, which includes finding yourself a therapist or a medical doctor and potentially starting medication if that's right for you. But generally speaking, what I'm really encouraging y'all to do is get an evaluation more than anything else. And then, of course, if y'all want to do other stuff for your wellness that has, good stuff behind it, if y'all want to start meditating, eating healthy, exercising, going to sleep on time, that stuff is fantastic too. And if y'all are looking for help in terms of, just additional things that we offer. So we've got stuff like coaching, which is where we help people sort of focus on motivation, goals, things like that. It's not therapy. It's sort of focused on all the things that therapists are not formally trained in. So therapists can help you with stuff like trauma, but they're not necessarily experts at improving your dating life. Which doesn't mean that therapy won't help that, but not that our coaches are experts at dating life either. So that's there, but coaching has been relatively full. I think we've been basically at like 99% capacity since May. And so, we still sort of take lots of people every day because people are cycling in and out. So feel free to join the wait list there. We also have resource packs, which are free resources on our platform, which kind of synthesize groups of YouTube videos along with exercises and like worksheets and kind of take-home points, things like that, which we've been getting good feedback on. And then the last thing is if y'all are interested in kind of more detailed and applicable stuff. So on stream, we'll like teach a lot of kind of intro stuff, but if y'all are interested in more advanced things, definitely check out Dr. K's guide. So we have a guide to meditation, anxiety, depression, and ADHD and doing stuff. So if y'all want to understand the neuroscience of like motivation and resistance and emotions and things like that, as well as stuff in the meditation guide about who you are and where your sense of self comes from, check that stuff out. The guides are basically built because the more advanced we go on stream, the more we lose people, right? Because like people are coming in and out. So we kind of have to stay somewhat surface level on stream. So if y'all are interested in more depth, check out the guides. I'm doing well, Kuwaisu. How are you? The plants are okay. Plants are doing good. Can we get an advanced stream sometime? We've done them. So sometimes, like if you guys are interested in advanced stuff, we could do that. We do them from time to time. So sometimes we'll do like a deep dive. So we did a deep dive into trauma, which I was pretty happy about, a deep dive into psychosomatic illness, which I was also pretty happy about, but I think resonated with fewer people. The problem with deep dives, just to give you all some context, is I tend to read about between 20, at a minimum of like 20 papers for a deep dive, and we'll oftentimes like go through a couple of books as well. So like making a 90-minute deep dive is probably about 30 hours of like research, or 40 or something like that. Yeah, maybe more, maybe less. But so those are just hard to produce. Like they're really like synthesis of a lot of information. But yeah, we can absolutely do that. And I think we're trying to think about how to do a little bit more in-depth stuff. So we're exploring other options. So stay tuned. It's actually lots of fun. It's not hard. Like I love doing it. Okay. I think so. I'm seeing a couple of questions. Have you ever talked about bipolar or hypomania? Hell yes, is the short answer. All kinds of stuff. we've done on bipolar disorder. So one is there's a segment in it in the depression guide. It's not all about bipolar. We did one of my favorite topics, which is people who are bipolar like this stuff, but generally speaking, people who are not, and there's probably 1% of the population is bipolar. So like the impact of bipolar disorder on creativity. So a lot of people don't realize this, but so if you kind of look at bipolar disorder, it's weird, right? Because generally speaking, mental illnesses are not when our mind breaks. Mental illnesses is when one part of our mind becomes hyperactive. So if you look at something like an autoimmune disease is the hyperactivity of the immune system. The immune system activates when it's not supposed to. So the thing about bipolar disorder is these are all normal, healthy functions that are out of whack. And then the question kind of becomes, okay, well, why would the brain potentially do this at all? And it turns out that if you look at people who are bipolar, when they're in a hypomanic or manic state, they are very, very creative. And there's even studies that show that people who are bipolar are more creative than the average person. So their raw capacity to like invent and create and innovate is actually better than normal. The problem is that with bipolar disorder, their organization or their ability to follow through gets damaged more by the bipolar disorder than their creativity can handle. So even though they have all these creative ideas, their ability to actually finish paintings or finish whatever the creative work is hampered by the illness. So one of the trickiest things that I've had to do as a psychiatrist is the patients who dislike their medication the most are oftentimes people who are bipolar, because it keeps their bipolar in check, but it reduces their creativity. So finding a balance with that and really helping people like foster that creativity or connect with that creativity without just dulling it out completely, and at the same time helping them sort of develop a life to where they can sort of really foster that creativity, but also follow through with it. That's been some of my most favorite work with people with bipolar. And I've worked with like artists and musicians and stuff. And then the other thing that's really interesting about bipolar is that, so, I used to work at Mass General Hospital, and Mass General Hospital is like in downtown Boston. So we get like a lot of kids from like Emerson and MIT and Harvard, and even talking to my colleagues who were working at places like Harvard University Health Services, they would tell me that the amount of type 2 bipolar kids at these universities is like way higher than normal. So by one estimate, one person was saying at least 3 times the national average. And if you kind of look at type 2 bipolar, these are people that can be very functional with like 4 hours of sleep for like 3 weeks at a time. So if it's like finals time, you've got all these like type 2 bipolar kids that are at places like MIT or Harvard, and they're able to just like work for 18 hours a day and sleep 4 hours a day, and they can do that. And then they burn out after finals are over and they go into depression, and that's like, it's very sad and it sucks. It's not worth it. But it looks like there are obviously some evolutionary advantages to pieces of bipolar disorder. I'm not saying that bipolar disorder itself is an evolutionary advantage. I think that's when things get too far, but really fascinating. Okay. So there's another question. We're going to get into stuff in a second. I'll take one more question. What to do if the manic phase goes way longer than 3 weeks? Buddy, you shouldn't even wait 1 week. If you're in a manic phase, the earlier you catch it, the better off things are going to be. So I'd say don't wait for post 3 weeks. Just get help like yesterday. And the best thing to do, actually, if you're bipolar, like the best outcomes come from sustained treatment, not waiting until you're manic and then going and seeing a mental health professional. The whole point of seeing a mental health professional over time is they keep you from getting manic, right? That's... How do you recognize it? So this is the problem with mania. The problem with mania is that when you're manic, you don't realize it. So the tricky thing about mania is that like it impairs your insight. So I've had patients who will be convinced that they can become elected as the next pope because their innovations in solar energy and aquaponics will be so revolutionary that it'll like inspire the Catholic Church, and that the Catholic Church, they need to become pope so they can institute their solar energy aquaponics environmental terraforming project across the world. And they can use all the land that the Catholic Church has to like institute these projects worldwide, and it'll save the world from climate change. And you can talk to this person and say, look, I don't know if that's going to work out. And they just don't realize it, right? So the challenge with being manic is that you really need to, it's not whether you think you're manic or not. That's where people who you trust, if they say you're manic or they're worried, you should go and get evaluated, right? This is what's kind of weird. The threshold for help cannot be you need help. It has to be someone's concerned. That's very obvious mania, though, right? I mean, to us, but to them, they're like, no, I just figured it out. I figured out how to save the world. Why not join your better and help them save the world instead of, I don't know if that's going to work out? So that's what's kind of fun about being a psychiatrist and working with people who are bipolar, is that like my goal is actually to help them fulfill their dreams. The problem with mania is that the dream that you have was crafted 60 minutes ago and will last all of 24 hours. So helping someone invest in a manic scheme is not like a good investment if you're their friend, because they're not going to stick with it, right? The idea is you should absolutely, and this is what I mean, like people who are bipolar can have really brilliant ideas, but the whole point is that they don't actually manifest in the world because they lack the follow through. So if you want to help someone who's bipolar with whatever they want to do, like that's cool, but the more level-headed they're going to be, by all means, support their creativity. But, you know, I don't think it makes you a bad friend to not support a plan to become the Pope through innovations in solar energy and, you know, whatever, aquaponics. Is it a good idea to treat an individual with hypomania if his condition is somewhat of a benefit to him or his daily function? Absolutely. So here's the thing to understand about hypomania. It helps you in the short term, but almost always causes more problems in the long term. The second thing, so even if you can stay awake for 3 weeks, 6 months of depression after that is not usually worth it. The second thing, the other reason that it's a good idea to treat people who are even hypomanic is that with treatment, you can get a lot of the benefits without the cost. Right? They can still do well on their exams without working frenetically for 18 hours a day and sleeping 4 hours a night. You can help them develop some degree of work-life balance where they can sleep 8 or 9 hours a night so that their mind is still like absorptive enough to where they can learn during the day. So on balance, it's just usually not worth it to be hypomanic. And with the right kind of help, you can sort of get a lot of those benefits without paying the cost. That's my general experience. Like I've worked with people who are literally, you know, faculty at top tier institutions who have type 2 bipolar disorder. And like, you know, these are people that have gigantic grants and run huge research labs. And like the takeaway is that, yeah, like treating this stuff is better. Because over time, over the course of 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, your output will be higher than if you like do something awesome for 3 weeks and then you're like struggling to get out of bed for the next 6 months. So True Yo-Yo Masters asking thoughts on RTMS. So I think it's a promising treatment so it expands our arsenal to deal with certain illnesses. I also think that sometimes people use TMS too liberally and in a non-evidence-based way. Now, I'm not saying that that's necessarily a problem because they may understand it and the evidence base may be lacking behind. But I've seen, unfortunately, one too many TMS places that focus on trying to treat personality disorders with TMS, which I don't think there's very good evidence for. So I think it's a useful and promising tool that people should absolutely consider. TMS, by the way, stands for transmagnetic stimulation. So it's kind of like it's a evolution of like electroshock therapy in some way. So we're sending magnetic waves using the healing power of magnets focally it's into some parts of the brain, and magnetism and electrical fields are connected. So when you sort of use magnetic waves, they induce electrical changes and can affect changes in the brain somewhat directly. So it's a super cool modality. Yeah, so TMS is usually super expensive. Do I have any experiences working with highly sensitive people? Sure. Like a device shown in so generally speaking, if you look at media representations like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, they have very poor representations of these things like ECT, which is electroconvulsive therapy. ECT is actually one of the safest treatments out there. It can be bad, but generally speaking, it's like first line treatment for mania and pregnant women, right? So when we look at like pregnancy and fetuses, we tend to be extra careful. Maybe it's not for acute mania. I don't know about first line treatment, but it's an approved treatment. So generally speaking, you want to do the least that you can. And so if you kind of look at it, like one of the basic problems with a lot of our treatments in psychiatry, at least our biological treatments, we're not talking about psychotherapy, but is that they have like side effects, right? So if you give someone, let's say, the standard medications for bipolar disorder, if we're not careful, some of them can affect the fetus. So, some bipolar medications are contraindicated in pregnancy. We don't give them in pregnancy because of the impact on the fetus. And so we need something that isn't going to travel through the placenta, and that's why like ECT can be good. We also use ECT in the elderly because their metabolism isn't quite as robust, so they suffer more from side effects of medication. Okay, we've got a lot of stuff to cover today, but these are great questions, and it's great vibing with y'all. This is fantastic. I hope y'all okay with how things are going so far on stream. Oh my God, what a great question. How do I know if I'm socially anxious or just an introvert? Fantastic question, Hal. Let's dive in. Okay. Let's see if this works. This is the introvert curse. You're hanging out with someone, what? And then some part of your brain is like, this guy's having fun at a social event. Doesn't he know he's an introvert? And then we unplug the social battery, and then you feel drained. So if we look at people nowadays, everybody is an introvert. Why? Because social interactions are exhausting. So let me ask y'all a question. What does an extrovert with social anxiety look like? Can extroverts get social anxiety? How does that work? So it turns out that everyone thinks that they're an introvert, and chances are that half of y'all at least are wrong. Okay? So there's a lot of common misconceptions about personality and introversion and extroversion, and people sort of think that, oh, if I get drained by social interactions, that means I'm an introvert. Well, it turns out that things are a little bit more complicated than that. Let's take a look at some science. Happy now, tired later. Extroverted and conscientious behavior are related to immediate mood gains, but to later fatigue. Extroverted behavior correlates with being socially tired later. Wow, that's kind of weird, right? That's interesting. So this is what a lot of people don't understand. If you get tired, that doesn't mean that if you get tired from social interactions, that does not mean that you are an introvert. What we're going to learn today is, first of all, how introversion and extroversion, there's a lot more complicated stuff about social anxiety. And once we understand why we actually get drained from social interactions, and extroverts, by the way, get drained from some social interactions more than introverts do. Then we'll understand what is the nature of introversion, extroversion, how does my social battery get drained? And we'll also give you one key thing, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, to not get drained when you interact socially. So we'll teach you how to have more energy when you approach social interactions, okay? So let's take a look at the science. So misconception number 1. Everyone thinks, oh my God, extroverts get energy from social interactions, and if I feel drained, that means I'm an introvert. Incorrect, okay? So what we tend to find is that even extroverts will become fatigued from social interaction. So let me show y'all something really interesting here. Let me find, this isn't the right one. Okay. So the other really interesting thing is that if you look at negative workspaces, so people where workspaces where people gossip. So a lot of y'all think, oh, I'm an introvert and I hate this fucking political, everyone's gossiping all the time and it's so exhausting. It turns out that if you are an introvert, you are actually resistant to workplace gossip. And actually, additionally, extroversion strengthens the main effect of negative workplace gossip on emotional exhaustion. Right? So this is bizarre. This means that actually extroverts are more sensitive to social things. And that negative workplace gossip actually gets negatively impacted by extroversion. So some of y'all out there may actually be extroverts, but you just get tired from social interactions. And that's because there is a simplistic view. I know this sounds crazy, but as we get more and more 60-second TikToks that have no nuance in them, we start to get these like black and white perceptions of what introversion and extroversion are. This means I am an introvert. This means I'm an extrovert. No, it doesn't. Half of y'all are introverts and half of y'all are extroverts. And on top of that, 87.5% of y'all are basically somewhat in the middle, and it shouldn't gigantically impact you. There are other things going on. Let's look at one more study. Energy's role in extroversion, how energy ties and task conflict help clarify the relationship between extroversion and proactive performance. Actually, I don't think this is not the study I'm looking for. Hold on. Okay, whatever. Okay. I can't find the study that I'm looking for. Okay. Let's just teach. Okay, so let's take a look. Let's understand this. So if I'm saying, hold on a second, if I get exhausted from social interactions, does that mean I'm not an introvert? Yes. There is even some evidence that being an extrovert causes certain kinds of social interactions to affect you more. So the key thing about extroversion is you are more connected to your social environment. So if you're fucking in a toxic workplace and you feel exhausted in going into work every day, it doesn't mean you're an introvert. Actually means you could be an extrovert who's just more sensitive to the workplace dynamics. Introversion means that you're less connected to workplace stuff or social interactions, okay? That's number one. Second thing is if we look at that fatigue paper, that even if you get a mood lift, you will be fatigued 3 hours later. And that finding is actually somewhat independent of whether you are an introvert or extrovert. So that sounds kind of weird or weren't we talking about extroversion in some way? So if you look at extroverted behavior leads to a mood lift followed by fatigue 3 hours later. And whether your personality is more of an introvert or extrovert, it actually doesn't matter. So this is the key thing. A lot of that exhaustion does not have to do with personality. And this is really important to understand because personality is relatively fixed. It can change some over time, but it's kind of who you are. The key thing to understand, what a lot of people don't understand about exhaustion and social interaction, it doesn't have to do with personality. It has to do with what's in your head at that moment, your behaviors, and the way that you frame social situations. So even introverts can learn how to enjoy social interactions. So if this isn't the case, if we're sort of saying that it doesn't matter that I'm an extrovert or an introvert, social interactions are going to be exhausting for everybody, and maybe even social interactions are more exhausting for extroverts in some situations, why does everyone feel so socially exhausted? And why does everyone think that they're an introvert? So there's a second thing going on. What exhausts people in social situations is also something like social anxiety. So if we look at social anxiety, which an extrovert can have, by the way, which is terrifying, it's really tricky. What happens is that when we go into social situations, when we have social anxiety, our cognitive RAM is filled up with anxious thoughts. So you go and you hang out with a group of friends and you're like, oh my God, like, what is this person thinking? Is this person upset? Should I speak in? When should I enter the conversation? I have something cool to say, but I don't know how to enter the conversation. I'm just waiting here, waiting for my chance to speak. And oh crap, now they've shifted to something else, but I had really something cool to say. Should I go back to the topic? But that feels kind of awkward and I kind of miss my chance, and oh crap. And like, now I'm not even saying anything, and are people wondering like if I'm just standing around, am I being a creep? This is what leads to social exhaustion. This is social anxiety. Now, why is this experience more common? The one uniform thing that I think is responsible for the rise in social anxiety across our generation, starting with millennials, it is getting worse the deeper down we go, the younger we get, is the use of technology. So what started to happen is we've stopped relating to other people like in person. We do things like DM each other on Discord. And when we use online-based communication, a lot of our empathic and social circuitry starts to rust. So just to give you all a simple example, when human beings used to sit around a fire and like talk to each other 2,000 years ago, there are all of these circuits in our brain that started to develop that measure tone, body language, facial expressions. And as those circuits develop, those things reassure us, right? Because you can, like, as you pay attention, you're not really paying attention, it's all subconscious. So the tone and body language of the people around you reassure you. You say, okay, these people like me, they feel comfortable. As we move on to more online communication, those parts of our brain rust. Because if I'm DMing 15 people on Discord, I don't have, like, the part of, like, I can't measure tone, I can't see body language. So those parts of our brains start to shut off in the same way that you forget a language if you don't use it. Now we go into a real life social situation. These parts of our brain that give us social reassurance are shut off. And so we don't get any of those positive signals telling us, hey, people actually don't think you're a creep. They're smiling at you. They're looking at you, right? They're like that. They don't think you're a creep. But as those parts of our brain deactivate, the cognitive part of our brain starts picking up all of that load. And then it starts hyperactivating and doing like calculations. And calculations are fatiguing. And the more cognitively you're sitting there calculating how to not screw up this conversation. And no wonder it's exhausting. It has nothing to do with whether you're an extrovert or an introvert. Okay? This is why social anxiety is increasing. This is why people are getting think they're an introvert all the time. Doesn't mean that you're an introvert. Next thing. So how do we fix this? Okay? So there are a couple of things. One is that you can just spend more time with other human beings. And as you spend time with human beings, those parts of your brain will start to the gears will start moving and it'll stop being a little bit rusty. Okay? But it's painful to do that. Right? And that's why people will say this shit like, just put yourself out there. Just put yourself out there. And you're like, that's painful. Yeah, it's painful, but it's going to take some time for your gears to adjust. So it's kind of like, if I'm sitting all day in an air-conditioned environment and then I start spending time outdoors where it's hot, it's going to feel really crappy, but eventually my body will start to change my thermoregulation because the body adapts, but it sucks until that adaptation kicks in. Second thing, so if we look at what causes exhaustion, when we socially interact with people. There's one primary variable that you can control, which is the purpose of the social interaction. So purpose-driven social interaction reduces the energy drain. So when I go to a party because my friends are like, hey, put yourself out there, and you're like, all right, I guess I have to go to a party. And then you go to a party, but you're like, okay, I'm just here to put myself out there. There's not a clear idea of like what you're doing there. There's not a clear purpose. That's going to be socially exhausting because you're just sitting there, you're holding a drink, maybe you're on your phone too. And you're kind of like, what am I even doing here? Like, this is a pain. Like, no one's talking to me. I'm not talking to anyone. You're not really like focused on, you don't have a particular goal. So this is what's really interesting is you can send introverts to social situations or extroverts. And if they have a purpose for being there, their energy will be way higher, right? So I can send an introvert to like, hey, like we're going to go play board games at a board game cafe. And like, we're going to have fun at a board game cafe. And then you go to a board game cafe and suddenly you've got these introverts who are chatting up the people next to them. Because I'm there with like my 3 friends. We're playing a 4-player game, but hey, let's play like Mafia or something like that. It involves 8 players. And now suddenly you're like making friends. There's tons of like people at anime conventions who are like hitting each other up and making friends, and half of them are introverts or half of them are extroverts. It's not like anime is like specifically an introvert hobby. That's what we think, but I don't think so. So purpose-driven social activity. So if you feel drained by social interaction, it doesn't mean you're an extrovert, doesn't mean you're an introvert. Instead, what you really need to think about is, what am I doing this for? What's my goal in being here? And even to sort of almost like operationalize that out a little bit. And if you're going to a party, okay, like I'm going to go here and I'm going to practice talking to people. So I'm going to try to introduce myself to 5 different people at the party. And I'm going to at least make small talk with 5 different people. And after that, if I'm not having a good time, after 45 minutes, I'm just going to leave. So lay it out for yourself. And then how do you actually introduce yourself to people at a party? You literally walk up to them and you can say, hi, hello. Don't say both of those things. That's weird. Walk up and say hi, smile, walk up, hold out your hand like this, and say, hi, my name is Alok. It's nice to meet you. And then you can kind of ask them like, how did y'all end up here? You can ask them why they're, how'd you end up here? Are you a friend of so-and-so? Someone invited you to the party, right? And you can say like, hey, I'm a friend of so-and-so's, however you got to the party, or I'm a student at this university. And I'm here to get to know some people and expand my social circle. That's it, right? You don't need an excuse. Like, oh my God, like I have no friends and I haven't left the house in 8 months. You don't need to say that. Just say, hey, I'm here to expand my social circle. I'm here to meet new people. Right? And that's all the reason you need. And they're like, this motherfucker, they're all socially anxious. So they're like, this motherfucker, I wish I could do that. They're like, now I have to explain why I'm here. Right? You get that? Like, all the socially anxious people wish they could walk up to someone and confidently introduce themselves. And confidently introducing yourself is not about having confidence. It's about being succinct. You just walk up, you say very little, and then the ball is in their court. That's it. Right? And you don't want to do some people are like, how you doing? Don't do any of that crap. Right? Or you can be, hi, hello, how are you doing today? Right? And if you stutter over your words, that's okay. You can stutter. You can say, hi. Hi. I can't create a stutter. So you can just stutter and you just say your thing. Hey, I'm here to meet people. Having a stutter doesn't mean that you're not a good human being. What if they laugh? Then let them laugh, right? That's why you're introducing yourself to 5 people. And maybe you said something that was funny. Who knows? Right? That's it. So a couple of takeaways. Number 1, not everyone is extroverted. I mean, not everyone is introverted. And there exists this rare creature called someone with extroversion and social anxiety. What's actually exhausting about social interactions is extroverted behavior And even if you find social situations exhausting, you could actually be an extrovert, because negativity in a social situation is more exhausting to extroverts than they are to introverts. And the most important thing is that getting exhausted or maintaining energy in a social interaction doesn't have to do with whether you are an extrovert or introvert. See, the problem with that is that it is defining. There's nothing you can do about it. You can't just wake up one day and change your personality. So that's why it's good news that what's exhausting is not your personality. Your personality is not what's exhausting you. It is the intention with which you go to social interactions. And more intentional social interaction leads to less draining of the battery. Questions? So what defines extroversion and introversion then, if it's not about how you gain and lose energy? What a great question. So it is about how you gain and lose energy. But the key thing to understand is that personality diagnosis is not the same as, this is so hard to explain. Let me think about this. So personality is the way that your hardware is wired. And one piece of your hardware is a battery. And so the way that your system is wired may correlate to what gets drained. But the battery draining, your cognitive energy is a separate feature from personality, right? So personality is kind of like your tendency in the way that you interact with things, but your mana pool is completely different. So energy, and there may be some correlation, and this is my basic complaint with a lot of personality research, is that a lot of personality research isn't applicable. So you can't really, you can change your personality, but it's not okay, if you're extroverted, then you can change that. The good news is that stuff like your energy drains on a day-to-day basis can be modulated through behavior and intention and all kinds of other cognitive stuff that is not your personality. The other thing to understand about something like the 5-factor model is they used factor analysis to develop it. So what they did, and sounds kind of weird, but this is how this works. So what they did is they looked at let's say 1,000 people, and they tried to figure out, okay, what are the scientific differences between these people? And what they discovered is that there's basically 5 buckets that you can have a different combination of that result in a given personality. And one of those buckets has something to do with social interaction. And that's the extroversion introversion. But it doesn't necessarily and then what people do is they'll extrapolate out. Okay, so one of them is a social dimension. One of them is a work ethic dimension. One of them is an openness dimension, right? So conscientiousness, openness, agreeableness, extroversion. So these are kind of the dimensions, but it doesn't mean that people who are high in openness are automatically more creative than people who are low in openness. People who are low in openness can absolutely be artists, but the kind of art they make is going to be a little bit different. It may be a little bit more rigorous. It may be more methodical. So that's why I think that there's if you kind of do clinical work, it's different from personality work. I think personality work is sort of a one-time thing where you kind of figure out where you are and you get some insight. But then there's a lot of stuff that's actionable, which is not really related to personality. But that's my bias as a clinician, right? I'm a clinician, not a personality researcher. So my job is helping actual human beings change something about their life. And the good news is you can give me someone with you can give me someone with high introversion and extroversion. I can help both of them go to a party and have a good time. The other problem with personality stuff is that generally speaking, the quality of assessments is poor. So everyone's out there diagnosing themselves as an introvert, but it's how are you diagnosing yourself with that? It's because someone on the internet said, well, if I get tired with social interactions, that means I'm an introvert. And not just one person, right? That's what everyone says about introversion. But it's more complicated than that. Am I missing the actual definition of the two? Yes, because I haven't given it. Right? So I think that there is people who are extroverted do. So here's what I would say. If you all want to understand the core definition, this is my take, okay? I'm not a personality researcher. What's the difference between an introvert and an extrovert? It's where their attention has a tendency to go. So extroverts will naturally attend to things outside of themselves, which is why extroverts are actually more sensitive to workplace gossip. Their mental will be more screwed by a toxic workplace because their attention naturally goes towards the outside. Introverts, their attention naturally turns inward. And so that's a key difference between those two things. That's it. Okay. How would you say that introversion or extroversion intersect with neurodivergent folks? What a great question. So if you're someone who's on the autism spectrum or even ADHD, the intersection between introversion and extroversion absolutely intersects. So let me start that over. So introversion and extroversion is a personality characteristic. And there are absolutely ways that it intersects with neurodivergency, whether we're talking about autism spectrum or something like ADHD. So let's start with autism spectrum. So remember that the core thing about introversion versus extroversion is the natural tendency of which direction your attention goes. So if your attention naturally flows outside versus your attention naturally flows inside. So that can interact with autism for sure. So if I find someone who is a willing listener, then if I'm on the spectrum, I may direct my attention very, very outwardly and will really talk this person's ear off about like whatever I'm interested in. And as long as they're willing to listen, I can talk. So I've met a lot of people who are on the spectrum who very much enjoy extroverted activity or social activity. The other intersection that we tend to see is sometimes you'll see like hyper-focus, right? So people with ADHD or autism spectrum will become perseverative on a particular thing. So their mind will like kind of go into a particular thing. And so we also see that sort of intersect with introversion where if there's perseveration and I'm introverted, those two things can kind of combine. The third thing to consider is that oftentimes people on the autism spectrum have difficulty with some social interactions, which absolutely impacts this extroversion introversion. So if I'm an extrovert, but I have difficulty with empathy, that's going to mean that I enjoy interacting with other people. My attention is outward, but I'm still kind of like having difficulty doing it. So one is like a tendency of what feels right for me, but I can still have difficulty doing it. So those are two different things. Do y'all get that? One is sort of a preference. So it's like I can love eating crunchy food and I can have no teeth. Right? So like one is like what I prefer in the way that I'm wired. And the second is something that interferes with my ability to naturally engage with the way that I'm wired. And I hope, please God, do not interpret that as like everyone on the spectrum is like social interactions are like trying to eat chips without teeth. I mean, I think that's a little bit, a little bit harsh. I mean, some of y'all, I wouldn't be surprised if you've had that experience and maybe I've captured it really well, but I didn't mean that as an indictment. I just used it as an analogy. Okay. So let's talk about neurodiversity with ADHD. So you can also be extroverted and have a tendency for your attention to go on the outside. And we know that people who have ADHD tend to be distractible. So this is kind of like a perfect storm, right? So I'm extroverted, my energy is on the outside, and I'm super easily distractible. So my mind is like very, very like prone to distraction from external stimuli. So sometimes those two things can combine, and I really like being distracted on the outside, but I also like have difficulty attending to conversations. So we know that one of the biggest, we know, my opinion, based on some research, is that a lot of the biggest problems that people with ADHD face actually have to do with their social interactions. So lack of social support. Some studies show that kids with ADHD by the second grade have not a single friend. No friends. They don't get invited to anything, right? They may have kids that they're friendly with, but like the way that they socially attend to people makes kids realize like, okay, this kid's not really listening to me when I speak. They do things like cut in line, stuff like that. Saberlight is raiding. What's up, Saberlight? Welcome. Thanks for the raid. Okay. All right. We're talking about introversion, extroversion, and social interaction. Oh, there's one other study I wanted to tell y'all about. Okay, maybe it'll jog my... We'll come to it. Okay, let's move on. We'll move on to something new since we've got Saber Chad people visiting. Okay, so introvert grocery shopping starter pack. 2 people in front of me of the milk display. I'll come back for that last. Walking briskly, hyper-focused on items to get and avoid aisles with more than one person. Handheld basket always. Awkwardly hand carry items that don't fit in baskets. No small talk. Self-checkout always. Place the item in the bag. Error sending associate for help. Okay, let me ask y'all something. People say, so this is what I'm talking about, is the internet all thinks that it's... hold on a second. There we go. Fixed. So the internet thinks that it is introverted. But let me ask y'all a question. How do you tell the difference? Is this introversion or social anxiety? How do you tell the difference? Like, what is this? Could this be an extrovert who is shopping with social anxiety, or is this an introvert? So let me tell y'all what an introvert actually does when they go to the grocery store. They don't even think about any of this stuff. They're in their own heads. They're like, okay, I got to get milk and stuff. I'm going to get a cart. I'm going to be somewhat socially oblivious because I'm so preoccupied with like whatever is in my internal thoughts. I'm like oblivious to stuff around me. People are going to be walking down the aisle and I'm not even paying attention to them because my attention is directed inwardly. What this looks like is social anxiety, being preoccupied with the thoughts of others. And remember, we just looked at a study that showed that negative workplace gossip affects extroverts more than introverts. So negative social interactions like this, asking an associate for help because you screwed up, will affect an extrovert more than an introvert. Y'all get that? Extroversion strengthens the main effect of negative workplace gossip on emotional exhaustion. Literally, this study is saying that this right here is more likely to be an extrovert than an introvert. And now this is a problem for y'all because y'all have decided that you are introverts because this is your experience of life. And then you go on trying to fix being an introvert when you are fixing the wrong thing. You're like, oh shit, this water in the bathtub is too cold. Or this water in the bathtub is too hot. Let me add more ice. But your temperature readings are off because the water isn't too hot. It's actually too cold. You're trying to fix the exact opposite problem. And there you are adding ice to the bucket. I mean, to the bathtub. Got to add more ice. Got to add more ice. Holy shit. That's hot. That's hot. It's getting hotter. It's getting even hotter. It's a fundamental misdiagnosis. Because what does an extrovert with social anxiety look like? Okay? Let's move on. Actual introvert starter pack. The thought of human interaction doesn't scare nor excite them too much. This is actually accurate. We just don't think about them. Enjoys their time alone. Also accurate. So let me tell y'all, how do you tell an introvert from an extrovert apart? When an introvert is with a group of people, they can be chilling by themselves without any trouble. Right? Even when they're participating in a conversation, they're not even paying attention because they're occupied with whatever tangent is in their head. You know, is fine with others in the elevator as long as they don't talk too much. Okay, let me tell y'all, let me give y'all you guys want to know in a nutshell how to tell the difference between introversion and social anxiety? In a nutshell, It's your emotional reaction to social interaction. If you get annoyed when people try to talk to you because it disrupts your internal symphony, you are an introvert. If you get worried when people try to talk to you because you don't know how to respond, that is social anxiety. Y'all get that? I mean, it's not actually like that, right? That's an oversimplification. But that's what I would say in a nutshell. Like, this is the thing. When I'm on a flight, you know what worries me? What makes me anxious? I got to go on this flight. I got to make some civil amount of small talk with the person next to me to not be an asshole. And then the problem is, if I do too good of a job at the civil small talk, then this person is going to think that I want to chat with them for the whole flight. So my anxiety around the social interaction isn't what they think of me. It's that as an introvert, I've learned how to be a decent social human being. And sometimes that gets me it creates the problem of like human interaction. That's what I worry about. So now I even have a strategy for that. I sit down next to them. I introduce myself. Hi, my name is Alok. Oh, where are you headed? Oh, same fucking place I'm headed because we're on the flight. But I'll say stupid shit like that, right? And then I'll ask them, oh, what's taking you there? Okay, yeah, I'm going for this. It's nice to meet you, you know. And then I will say this explicit sentence. It was awesome meeting you. I've got to do some work. Or even if then I pull out my Nintendo Switch. I'll say I'll just say it was nice to meet you. And then I'll just pull out the Switch. Signals to them, hey, this conversation is over. I'm done with you. Or I'll say something like, enjoy your flight. And then I'll pull out the Switch. And sometimes I'll say like, you know, I've really got to get some work done. And then I'll pull out some work. So you kind of like signal to them, conversation is over. I'm done with you. And then you pull something out. And I'm sure it feels a little bit off or abrupt. Sometimes what I'll also do is like I'll get up and I'll strategically use the bathroom. And then like the conversation is kind of dead. You know, sometimes I'll let it die. Like if they're not too socially engaging because they're like, oh man, this asshole wants to talk to me the whole flight. I ain't going to do that. So they kind of like don't ask me questions and they'll answer with one or two words. And then we're Gucci, baby. Y'all get that? Dr. K is introverted. Of course I'm introverted. Bruh. I spent like 3 months by myself in like Indian hill country in like South India. And I was fine. And for those of y'all thinking, oh, I have to hold my pee for 13 hours so that I can piss when I go on the airplane. Here's the crazy thing. You don't even need to piss. You can go in there and not piss. You don't actually have to have urine in the bladder. You can just go in and pretend to piss. They're not going to know the difference. They ain't watching you. You don't need to piss. They're not watching in the bathroom. Right? And sometimes, like, hell, like, even if I don't need to piss, I'll go and, like, maybe wash my face or, like, you know, floss if you feel like it. You know? What if you're an introvert with social anxiety? Then you got to tackle the social anxiety. That's what I'm saying. The problem isn't introversion or extroversion. The problem is the way you socially engage. Okay, we're not going to milk one out. That's a different kind of Mile High Club. So extroverts feel the need to sit in a quiet corner. I'm not sure what that's referring to, but yeah. The other thing, y'all, so big disclaimer here, right? So I'm not a personality researcher or expert. I'm a clinician. So I think in terms of problems and actionable behaviors or even actionable changes like in your mind, I'm not an expert in personality analysis. So it's very possible that some of the stuff that I'm saying, like, you know, I did a cursory literature search and I have some understanding of it, but like there may be other people out there. So the other thing is, if you look at the research on introverts and extroverts, it's like population based, right? So they'll say that extroverts, if I take 1,000 extroverts and 1,000 introverts, 600 of them will enjoy a party, whereas 400 of the introverts will enjoy a party. But you've still got 400 introverts who somehow figured out how to have fun at a party. And you've still got 400 extroverts who, despite the fact that they're extroverts, find parties to be very, very hard to get through, right? That's my point, is that they're not, it's not deterministic. There are large populations of introverts who are very social. I'm kind of like that. So I like, when I was in college, I learned how to socialize. So I had a rule for myself that I was never going to eat lunch alone. And I was never going to have lunch with the same person twice in 1 week. Simple rule to teach yourself how to socially interact while also not pushing yourself too far, right? It's like 1 hour a day for 5 days a week. And so what I do is just start asking people, hey, you want to grab lunch? Hey, you want to grab lunch? Hey, you want to grab lunch? And then, sounds great. It was great. I met a lot of people. The most important thing is that those rusty empathic gears from too much gaming started to de-rust. Is it a good idea to approach strangers on the street if I don't know anybody? I would say probably not. But that's where, so when people say go out and just put yourself out there, I think that's where an activity or some kind of common cause. So let me tell y'all, there are two major things. Okay. We're going to teach y'all two things, hopefully in 2 minutes, that will teach, let me think about how to say this. So we're going to teach y'all how to make friends using 2 rules in under 2 minutes. So friendship requires 2 basic things. First thing it requires is common cause. So people have to be there for a shared purpose. This is the first way that human beings bind together. The second thing that they need is regular, unplanned interactions. So you need to see this person more than once without the two y'all making a plan to see each other. This is why we make friends in places like classes. Because we show up, we've got to study for the same test, and we get to see each other day after day after day after day without either of us forcing it. The problem that we run into nowadays is that we try to force interactions with people, so it feels way too artificial and pressured. And the second thing is that you can't randomly meet people and make friends with them because you have no common cause. So if you want to make friends, what you need to do is check these 2 boxes. So go somewhere where you and another human being have the same goal. And that's done by the structure of the place. So if it's not class, you can go to a class, or you can go hiking, or you can go do volunteering, some kind of common cause. And then you need to show up there 4 weeks in a row and run into the same people that show up there 4 weeks in a row. Then you can ease into a friendship. It's that simple. Right? So the one thing I'd be careful about is something like gym. So sometimes when there isn't common cause at a gym, sometimes people are there not to work out with someone. They're there to work out on their own. So I'd say classes in a gym are different. So if you want to go to the gym, don't just randomly start talking to people because they may be working out. If you can go to a class, that's ideal. Or what you can do if you go to the gym is start with, so I'm a dude, so I don't know exactly how to do this with women, but what I'll start with is the bro nod. Right? So you see another dude at the gym, you see him there a couple of times, and then you guys get to know each other, and then you give him the nod, and that's it. And then after 3 or 4 weeks or 5 or 6 weeks or whatever, I'll walk up and introduce myself, and I'll say, hey, I'm Alok. Seems like we work out around the same time. That's it. And then if you want to, if the person is more experienced or whatever, you can go and ask them for a favor. That's another really good thing. You can say, hey, can you give me a spot? I want to do another set of whatever. Right? Or hey, can you take a quick look at my form, or I had a question about this exercise or whatever. So another really good thing that you can do is ask for some kind of help. Right? And that's professional. Seriously, y'all, bro nod is one of the best social skills. Bro nod and smile. And just being able to introduce yourself. Okay. Next up. Okay, so y'all tell me. I feel like I'm only doing 10% of what others are doing, but at the same time, 90% more drained and tired. You guys want to talk about have goals, feel resistance to goals, maybe journal, feel resistance to journal. Okay, why we can't move towards our goals. There's fruitlessly trying to remember my trauma and creating fan theories about my childhood. So we can do this one. So this is like, we can talk about feeling drained. This is more social stuff related to ADHD. Talking about inaction and goals. Talking about not being able to remember your trauma. Or, oh, there's something about the cult of trauma, which is like everyone says that this is trauma. What do y'all want to do? Oh. Let's see if I can. I'm going to set up a poll. I try to poll chat. Oh, awesome. Thank you, mods. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay. So it sounds like our brilliant people sort of predicted what y'all were going to say and even sequenced them in that order. So we're basically going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. That's a double win. One for if Tech Teller's around and did the poll, awesome. And you also correctly, this is how well Tech Teller understands y'all. He just sequences things in the order that we should do them. Isn't that cool? I mean, we can potentially do them all. All right. So let's get started. TLDR, everybody else seems to be doing so much more with their life and still have energy left at the end of the day. I'm trying my best, but it feels like 10% of what others do. And yet again, I feel like I could sleep for 6 months straight. I want to do more, help more, work more, socialize more, but I feel like I'm running on the battery of a small alarm clock from the early 90s. Whew. 30-year-old male here, have been diagnosed with ADHD when I was 10. People forgot about it. Life fell apart. Struggled all my life with depression and anxiety. Had therapy. Got re-diagnosed at 26. Finally, stuff started to make sense. And the past 4 years have been the best of my life so far. Lately, though, the past few weeks, I've noticed that I'm becoming increasingly quieter, more tired, and generally meh. I know this could be due to a myriad of reasons. Nobody here could definitely tell me what is going on, but apparently I still had the impulse to share. So yes, I have a lot of stress with my studies at the moment. I don't remember the last time I had a proper break in the sense that I had I have to do XYZ until XYZ or I'll get in trouble. I've checked everything else. I sleep all right, rather active, cycle every day, go for long walks, have stuff to do, surrounded by people. Everyday relationship is going well. No financial stress or anything. Blood has been checked lately and everything seems fine. Awesome. I might just be stressed, but there are so many people around me that seem to be doing so much more than I'm doing. I know it's hard to compare oneself to other people, but I just feel like what I'm doing every day is so much less. At the end of the day, many people even seem to have time and space left to socialize. Hell, my battery is drained after 3 hours of interaction. Oh, interesting. Interesting. I wonder if there is research around this. Predict mental depletion after a 3-hour delay. Fascinating. After 3 hours of interaction. I would love to, or have the feeling that I should take care of connecting with friends more, but honestly, I just want to be alone with my girlfriend at the end of the day and make some music or go for a walk. What's wrong with me? Am I doing something wrong? Should I be doing more? I'm not doing enough. I am not enough. You know the drill. Okay. So let's start by breaking down what's going on here. So this is a case of someone who is diagnosed with ADHD, did not get sufficient treatment until the age of 26. Now it looks like they're finishing college, so they're at the end of college, right? They're stressed out. Did I understand that they're at the end of college? Hold on. I don't know. Hold on. I don't know actually what they're doing. Hold on. Let me just make sure I know this, then I'll get started. Okay, did y'all catch that? Or they're studying, right? Okay. So let's start. Okay. So this is a case of a 30-year-old person. Diagnosed with ADHD, did not get treated. Started getting treated at 26. Now they're doing well. It sounds like they're in a relationship. They're advancing either with work or studying. They're in a high-stress situation. So there isn't a day that goes by where they don't think about, okay, I got to do this. There's a deadline coming up, et cetera, et cetera. And they feel like they have no energy left. And other people around them seem to be doing the same amount of work, but have energy left at the end of the day. So why is this? A lot of things going on here. So let's start with this. The first is that if you have ADHD, it takes you more effort to do one thing than it takes a neurotypical person until you train yourself otherwise. So if we look at the nature of distractibility, I've got to work on a paper, open up a Word document, start typing, and then I get distracted. Oh, I need to find this thing. I pull this thing out. I start reading it. Okay, this paper is over here. I don't understand what this means. I'm going to look at something on Wikipedia. Once I'm on Wikipedia on the computer, I'm going to alt-tab and watch some YouTube. Highly distractible. So if you look at the amount of time it takes to complete a task, it takes 1 hour of work for a neurotypical person and 1 hour of work for an ADHD person. The problem is that the person with ADHD spends 4 hours doing 1 hour of work. And so what happens is at the end of those 4 hours, you've been like, your machine has been running for 4 hours, but you only have a 1 hour yield to show for it. So if we look at it from an objective perspective, until people with ADHD learn otherwise, and we'll get to that, it literally takes them more effort to do the same amount of work. So this person is not wrong. But there's way more to the story. The second thing that tends to happen, and I see this a lot with people with ADHD, is people tend to flounder for a while. And something happens at the age of 26, very common. Adult ADHD is an increasing diagnosis. So it gets missed a lot in childhood. Why? Because kids with ADHD are smart. If you're a smart kid with ADHD, you develop compensatory mechanisms so that the ADHD does not affect your life as much. And so you actually don't get the help that you should get if you are failing completely. So you're able to pull off C's instead of straight F's. Because even though it takes you 4 hours to do 1 hour worth of work, you're so fucking smart that you can take that hour and you can actually turn it into 2. So the ADHD diagnosis gets missed. Then what happens is as it gets diagnosed later in life and people start putting their lives together, they enter this period, and I want to say it's like 2 to 4 years in, like really 3-4 years in, where they start to feel a ton of fatigue. And why is that? It's because they're ramping up to a regular life. So I don't know if this kind of makes sense, but you know, when you first start college, it feels overwhelming, and then you ramp up to it, right? Suddenly, like, you're not forced to go to class, so you have to learn time management. You have to, you only go to class 3 days a week or whatever. There's a lot more, optional stuff. So there's, this adjustment period. When I started med school, there was one hell of an adjustment. I just finished college, and then suddenly you are learning 5 times as much information per week. And there's one hell of adjustment in your first year of med school. And then they ramp it up in your second year. And now you're learning 10 times as much as you did in college. And then they ramp it up more in third year. Because now in third year, you're working in the hospital. You don't have time to read all day, but you're expected to know all of this stuff. And that's an adjustment. So life is a series of adjustments. And what happens with people with ADHD is since they're so behind in life, as they start to catch up and they become somewhere on the level of normal human beings, if you compare yourself to your peers, they've gone through that adjustment phase and you're still adapting. So it can feel like it's really, really, really hard for you to survive. Even though you're surviving, it feels very exhausting. That will get better. And I see this really with people with ADHD, like in year 3 or 4 of college, where now they're like playing in the big leagues with everybody else. And that's just tiring in and of itself. The third thing that's going on here is stress. So if you sort of think about your 3rd or 4th years, those are objectively harder than your 1st or 2nd years in a lot of ways, right? Advanced classes, more intensive material. You're writing theses, things like that. There's like other like kind of advanced stuff. Generally speaking, it can be easier for a lot of people because you enjoy it more, hopefully. But the workload is objectively higher. And so when you're in this position of, I think this person puts it this way, I have a lot of stress with my studies at the moment. Yes, I don't remember the last time I had a proper break in the sense that I had I have to do XYZ until XYZ or I'll get in trouble. So what I'm hearing from this person is this person has constant deadlines and hasn't been able to take a break. So how does that affect people? It affects them through the cortisol system. So what cortisol does is buys me 24 hours of high productivity for a week of exhaustion afterward. That's literally what happens. So what cortisol does is cannibalizes our things like muscle tissue to give us energy over the 24-hour period. So what we're doing is we're chopping down a wall to get firewood to survive for the next 24 hours. So when you're in a chronic state of stress, because normally what happens is human beings would recover, right? If I'm like hunting in the jungle and I get attacked by a pack of hyenas, I fend off the hyenas, I run away, my tribe comes to save me, we move a little bit, and then it's not like there's another pack of hyenas there the next day. Then I like rest, I relax, I catch up on my sleep, I recover. But in modern society, we don't get those times. We have chronic stress. So every day, my body has this system that activates, that helps me get through the next 24 hours, but then I don't rest for a week afterward. And so over time, that depletes your ability to do work. So why are you more fatigued than your colleagues? Because literally, your body has been chopping down walls for firewood, and then you're wondering, why am I getting more cold? Because your walls are gone. So this is the next thing that's going on. The last thing that goes on with ADHD, why people feel so exhausted, is this. What is wrong with me? Am I doing something wrong? Should I be doing more? I am not doing enough. I am not enough. This is the other problem. So why is it that someone with ADHD cannot realize that this is not me? Why do they assume that the problem is within me instead of, yeah, I'm in advanced courses, I'm working really hard, I actually objectively have a lot on my plate? Why don't they think that way? So if you look at a population of people who have ADHD and depression, what you discover is that 70% of the people who have ADHD first will develop depression later in life. 3% of the people who have depression first will develop ADHD later in life. ADHD has a causative effect for depression. Why is that? When a child grows up with ADHD, something very important happens. They realize that I'm just as smart as my friends. They realize that I'm no stupider than anyone else. But they also see when they're in the first grade, the second grade, they're 6 years old, 7 years old. They start to realize that I'm not able to do what they're able to do. It's way harder for me to pay attention. I forget my homework. I forgot I had a test. I'm just as smart as they are, but I can't remember having a test. When I sit down to study just like they do, I'm just as smart as they are, but I can't actually read the words on the page. They don't even realize that, right? They just have the textbook open in front of them. Their mind is all over the place. They just realize, I can't do this. And no one ever explains to them that this is like a problem because you have ADHD. Your attention is different from other kids. There's nothing wrong. What is wrong with you, what's different is your attention. So what does a 6-year-old conclude? In the absence of a diagnosis, a compassionate diagnosis, and some amount of explanation, there is something wrong with me. Fundamentally, something's busted because I'm just as smart as they are. But when I put in 4 hours, I get a B. And when they put in 1 hour, they get an A. There's something fundamentally wrong with me. This belief starts at the age of 5, 6, 7. Remember that oftentimes kids by the age of 7 or so with ADHD, many of them will not get invited to a single birthday party. And why is that? It's because they don't wait their turn on the playground because they're distractible and impulsive. So they don't get invited to places. And then there's social isolation. And then we're also proud of kids for what? For doing well in school. So we're not proud of those kids. In fact, what happens is those kids, like myself, get taken to teacher conferences. And the teacher would say, you know what? Alok is so smart. He just needs to apply himself. If he just tried harder, then he could do so much more. And so what does the kid feel walking out of that school conference? It means that there's not something wrong with me. It's just a lack of my effort. I'm just like, my IQ ain't low, but I'm just stupid for not applying myself. They don't understand that I'm actually applying myself as hard as I can. And so the feedback that these children get essentially results in this. Look at this statement. This is damning. I am not enough. I am not enough. And when you carry this within you, then it shapes how you look at everything else. You don't consider the stress objectively because in the back of your mind, you're not enough. So it's not the stress or the external circumstances, even though this person intellectually knows that it's the circumstances. You guys see this? Like, look. Intellectually, in their post, they say, I have a lot of stress. I don't remember the last time I had a proper break. Even though they know that, they're unable to connect those dots. One part of their mind is connecting those dots. Hey, the reason you're fucking tired all the time is because you haven't had a break. They even went and got blood tested. Maybe something's wrong with you. Okay, nothing's wrong with me. Let me just check. There's a part of your brain that knows there's nothing wrong with you. The problem is that for 26 years of your life, you learned that there's something wrong with you. And those two things clash. And that's why people with ADHD continue to blame themselves even though they're doing a good job. So if you are in this pickle, couple of things that you can do. The first thing that you can do is understand how to be better at working. So if you look at psychotherapy for ADHD versus medication treatment for ADHD, both of them improve ADHD the same amount. I can send someone to a psychotherapist or give them Adderall or a stimulant, and I can improve their focus by the same amount. I can improve their outcomes by the same amount. The difference is that if the medication stops, the effect goes away. If we stop psychotherapy, the effect lasts for 2 years after stopping psychotherapy. Why? So what psychotherapists will do is teach people with ADHD how to function in this world despite having distractible attention. It means things like get really good with your calendar. Make a to-do list. So one tip that I'll give people is that if you're working on a project, find all of your materials first and assemble them. Don't go and look for materials in the middle of your work. So if you've got some stuff on Google Drive or Dropbox, open it all up and set it to the side, or print those papers out and keep them there. Because if you open up a new tab and start hunting for stuff on the internet when you are trying to write a paper and you have ADHD, you're screwed. All of your work materials need to be organized. Calendar, alarms, all kinds of stuff. You can set up a system that will essentially protect you from your ADHD. We dive into this super, super deep with Dr. K's Guide to ADHD and Doing Stuff. It's a guide about what is the science of doing stuff. What are the techniques that you need to understand that will help you do stuff? And this is everything from like understanding emotional blocks to organizational systems. So you can get some of that from therapy. You can get some of it from the guide. Second thing that you need to work on with ADHD is your sense of confidence, or the person that you believe that you are. Essentially the untreated trauma of ADHD, of growing up with ADHD. That's undertreated. Because then you will form conclusions about yourself that will sabotage your efforts to do better in life. This is something that a psychotherapist will help you with. And when I work with a patient with ADHD, what I basically do, I have a 1-2 punch. So I'm going to help them with all these organizational skills, and I'm going to work on their confidence. So I'm going to treat this patient as if they have depression. And if I can get them to believe in themselves again, it'll change the way that they look at the world. So this is like the key thing to do, right? So you need to learn the organizational tools that will protect you from your ADHD. Meditation is also great. You can train your executive function and stuff like that. That's what we cover in the guide. And absolutely go see a therapist. Third, 4 things you can do. You can absolutely go get your hormones checked, go see a medical doctor, start medication if that's what you want to do. But the beautiful thing is I've worked with a ton of people who have ADHD who are very successful and did not start out that way. There is absolutely a methodology to this. In this case, is textbook. And if you're someone who struggles with this, where even though you're doing better in life, it feels so exhausting. And other people seem to be playing life on easy mode and you're playing life on hard mode. You can still down the bosses and beat the level, but it costs you so much more. And you carry around this idea that I'm not enough in some way. This needs to be fixed. Both of them can absolutely be fixed. With some simple organizational skills and workflow kind of stuff, you can learn how to study with a distractible mind and work on your confidence. That's what will ultimately help you realize, okay, I can do just as well as someone who's neurotypical in this world. I just need to play the hand that I'm dealt instead of copycatting neurotypical kids. That's where ADHD kids get screwed. Questions? Can ADHD-like symptoms arise from use of technology? Absolutely. Absolutely. So so this is something to understand. How does technology induce ADHD-like symptoms? First thing to understand is that the brain uses it or loses it. So if I learn a language and then I stop speaking it, my brain will forget it. So if we look at what's going on the internet, content is becoming more impulsive and shorter length. So what's happening is stuff is becoming more clickbaity. So when I watch, let's say, an hour of short form content, I'm not watching one piece of content. I'm watching content for 60 to 180 seconds or 15 to 180 seconds. And so when I do that hour after hour after hour, day after day after day, my brain is we don't need to learn how to pay attention to something. Our mind does not need to focus for longer than 2 minutes. And so then what we see is an atrophy of our capacity to focus. And when our capacity to focus atrophies, we start to have attentional problems. That's how technology causes, it doesn't cause ADHD, but it causes things that overlap and look like ADHD. How do you fix that? The same way that you learn a language, right? So the more that you expose your brain to the language, the more it will remember. So the more that you spend time sitting and focusing on something while getting distracted, but not quitting, not giving into distraction, the better your focus will become. So this is why, for example, people will say meditate and it improves ADHD, because what are you doing in meditation? You're focusing on, let's say, your breath for 15 minutes. And even though your mind wanders, you always come back to the breath. So if you've got ADHD, force yourself to focus on one thing. You will fail, but then bring yourself back to it. Bring yourself back to it. Bring yourself back to it. And the real thing that happens with ADHD is not strengthening your ability to focus on one thing. What actually gets strengthened is your ability to return from a distraction to your task. So right now what happens with ADHD, this is the tricky thing. When you get distracted, what is the cost? Once you open up TikTok or YouTube Shorts or Instagram Reels or whatever, 45 minutes disappear before you come back to your task. When you meditate, and as you become an expert meditator, you may get distracted the same amount. The difference is that within 5 seconds, you'll return. Think about that. Imagine if a distraction did not cost you as much. This is how meditation improves ADHD. It doesn't actually change the attentional, it does change the attentional fundamentals, but even without changing the attentional fundamentals, it reduces the price you pay for having ADHD. That's the real strategy. It doesn't change your brain. It changes your ability to live and work with your brain. So this is the other last thing I'll tell y'all. So the cool thing is a lot of people with ADHD will tell me, I suck at meditation. I can't focus on one thing for 15 minutes. And the actual mental muscle is not focusing on one thing for 10 or 15 minutes. The mental muscle is once you get distracted, bringing your mind back is the equivalent of a rep. That's one push-up. And so if you get distracted 15 times a minute while you're meditating and you bring yourself back, because in order to get distracted 15 times, you have to bring yourself back 14 times. Y'all get that? The more times you get distracted, the more times you're bringing yourself back. Each one of those is a push-up. People with ADHD do more reps during meditation than a neurotypical person. They're actually getting swole at a greater rate than a neurotypical person. And people with ADHD will gain more from meditation in a short amount of time compared to a neurotypical person in this capacity. That's been my experience. So I became like a meditation beast within like 60 days. Like I went to India, took my first meditation class, was fucking depressed every day, cried every day for like an hour because I was like, what am I doing here? I'm alone, whatever. And then 4 weeks in, I was like, this is pretty cool. And 6 weeks in, I was like, I'm going to be a monk for the rest of my life and do this. Meditate. From what the hell am I doing to 4 weeks later, this is what I'm doing for the rest of my life. And I've noticed that when I kind of unlock this like realization for my patients with ADHD, they love it. They become the most dedicated meditators. Another small tip. If you're struggling to meditate with ADHD, open your eyes. So everyone's like, close your eyes when we meditate. Close your eyes. Focus. So, in order for people with ADHD to meditate, sometimes what people with ADHD need is some amount of external stimulation to calm down their mind. So let me see if I can find y'all this. Video of kid with ADHD in chair. Yeah, so let's see if we can like take a look at this. Okay? So I'll show y'all this principle. Oh, sorry. Okay. So if you look at that, there's a big difference. Okay, I got distracted. Let's try this again, chat. All right, so if we look at this, I don't know that we need to even really. If we look at this, this is the same kid. And in one case, he's got something that occupies his attention, a high stimulation thing. And then in the other case, he's got a low stimulation thing. And what do you notice about what this kid does to himself? So when you have a kid with ADHD, what ends up happening is they have to self-stimulate if their mind is not getting enough stimulation. That's why they spin around in chairs. Spinning around in the chair actually helps the kid focus on the math video. So when I'm trying to have a lecture with people with ADHD, I'll tell them to bring in some kind of fidget something. I'm like, you can bring in knitting. So in the hospital, we use knitting. We give them knitting stuff. It's like, while we're talking about stuff, while I'm teaching you whatever, you're just going to be knitting. And if you have ADHD, you know this, even while you're watching something, you got to be scrolling. So you need some amount of stimulation to focus your mind, or even some amount of distraction to focus your mind, which is really, really confusing. 99% of meditation teachers do not understand this because meditation teachers usually aren't clinicians. And the problem is that a lot of the meditation teachers who are clinicians have not really learned meditation. They've taken an 8-week course in whatever and got a certification. So if you get distracted while you meditate, open your eyes. You need that sensory input to help you. Some amount of distraction will focus your mind. And closing your eyes cuts off a level of stimulation that you need. It's just like the kid spinning around in the chair. It's like, oh, I need some kind of stimulation to help me focus. Right? This makes things easier for me, not harder. And that's just because the brains of kids are different. So if you want to be better at meditating, don't ever close your eyes when you meditate. Okay? Now I'm dizzy, chat. You can blink. It's okay. So you can also, half-lidded gaze is really good. So you can kind of unfocus and kind of half-lidded. Should it be a goal to eventually do it with eyes closed? Absolutely not. So this is something to understand. The goal, if you are a neurodiverse human being, the goal is not to start living your life like a neurotypical person. And if a neurotypical person can meditate with their eyes closed, the goal is not for you to rise up to the level of neurotypical people. The goal is for you to achieve the same thing that they do, but not necessarily using their methodology. You need a different methodology to get to the same level of success. This is the fundamental thing. We're not trying to turn an ADHD person into a regular person or neurotypical person. We're trying to teach you how you can live your life with your brain so that you can achieve the same thing. You've got a different hand of cards, so you don't want to use the same strategy to win the game. You need to employ a different strategy. So if you've got ADHD, the goal that you set for yourself is not, I want to be able to do what the other people do. It's not about duplicating their actions. It's about how can I achieve what they achieve using my brain. So meditation, the goal of meditation has nothing to do with eyes open or closed. The goal of meditation is to achieve a particular state of mind. So with ADHD, you want to get to that state of mind. However the hell you do it is up to you. You don't even need to sit still. You don't need to sit in Padmasana or anything like that. So when I have patients with ADHD, I'll teach them walking meditations. I'll teach them body-mind practices. So stand up on one foot for as long as you can and balance. I stress them out. I push them to where in order to stand on one leg for 3 minutes at a time, it forces their attention. You have to focus with 100% of your being, otherwise you're going to fucking fall over. And then they focus for 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes. Then they enter the trance. And who the hell cares whether you're using a mala or you have this incense or you're doing this branded meditation? Your eyes are open, your eyes are closed. You're wearing fancy yoga pants that you bought for $200 or you're wearing nothing at all. Doesn't matter. The rest of it is all crap. The question is, what state of mind do you achieve? Okay, let's move on. All right, give me a second, chat. Is walking naked meditation something you recommend in public? No, it is not. And how do you know you're streaming on Twitch when someone asks that question? Okay, so by the way, so I see there's a lot of questions about meditation. So we're going to answer one more. Is there a certain location or time of the day that meditation is preferred or should be avoided? Absolutely. So meditation is about achieving a state of mind. It is not about performing an action. So we have to understand this, right? So meditation is like going to sleep. So sleep is a state of mind that you cannot do. It is something that happens to you. So I can go to bed, but I can't necessarily fall asleep. Falling asleep is not under my control. It is a state of consciousness that is induced by particular actions, like going to bed, snuggling with something, pulling the covers up, turning down the air conditioner. So we, fingers crossed, will enter the state of mind by taking particular actions. Meditation is about inducing a state of mind. So then the question becomes, what makes it easier to induce that state of mind? So it turns out that our circadian rhythm correlates with the ability to induce a meditative state. So there are other things that induce a meditative state. So for example, spiritual experiences in meditation, like being connected to the divine, are induced by high levels of CO2 in the brain. This is why meditators will focus on breathing and will usually have a very low respiratory rate. So there's all kinds of physiology that can induce a meditative state. So the periods of dawn and dusk are the periods where, based on our circadian rhythm, it is the easiest to enter a meditative trance, which is why if you look at this across the globe, what you find is just about every major religious tradition has some kind of prayer at dawn or dusk. So in the Catholic Church, you have matins. In the Hindu tradition, you have Brahma Muhurta. In the Muslim tradition, you have praying 5 times a day, and one of them is around dawn and one of them is around dusk. So all these religions that are somewhat independent basically figured out that, okay, if I pray at a certain time of the day, I'm closer to God. Greater chance of inducing a spiritual experience. So ideally, you should meditate at dawn and dusk. There's one other really interesting example of this, is you can look at visual acuity. So look at when colors are the most vivid. So why are sunsets so beautiful? It's not just that the angle of the sun and the change of the color in the atmosphere. If you want to run a really simple experiment, go find a plant and look at the plant under the noonday sun, look at the plant at sunset, and look at the plant in the middle of the night. And notice what you see about the vividness of the green. Our brains are actually wired to have a certain level of cognitive and physiologic activation at dawn or dusk. And that level of activation, where we're not up and going all the way, but we are sort of waking up. So we're still physiologically a little bit chill, and our minds are a little bit chill, and yet we're still kind of awake and active. That's when you can induce that meditative state. So if you guys want to know this kind of stuff, this is what Dr. K's guide to meditation contains, all this kind of crap. So if you're interested in optimizing your meditation practice, we literally have a whole guide where we go through dozens of practices and lots of these understanding how to formulate your own practice. So check that out if you guys are interested in these kinds of meditation optimizations. Why are the hours of 12 to 2 unbearable? Because of circadian rhythm. So if you look at mammals, if you go to Africa and you go to the Serengeti Plain, what are most mammals going to be doing between 12 and 2? So here's why the hours of 12 and 2 are unbearable. The first is that our circadian rhythm has a natural dip where we slip into parasympathetic nervous system. It's the hottest part of the day. Things tend to be relatively inactive. So if you think about the cost of hunting at noon, if you're a mammal, is very high because you're running under the sun. So every step you take costs you more. Second reason is we usually have lunch. And so lunch induces a parasympathetic activation, which makes you sleepy. So when we have lunch, we're sort of getting all this like blood glucose, which causes an insulin spike. Insulin makes us sleepy. And this is also why we have a, 3 to 4 p.m. coffee to try to like get us back. The third thing that starts to happen around 12 to 2 is the caffeine half-life, which we had in the morning, starts to run out. So caffeine will like really last about 4 solid hours, and it starts to dip below where we need it. And then by 3 or 4 p.m., it's kind of run out of our system. So a lot of times people will have a cup of tea or whatever, afternoon tea. So it's because of caffeine, it's because of circadian rhythm, and it's because of blood glucose induced by lunch. So one thing that you can do is stop drinking caffeine in the morning and just detox off of caffeine. That'll improve your 12 to 2 energy window. Second thing you can do is specifically have a very low carbohydrate or not a very big lunch. And this is the problem. Even something like a sandwich, which has 2 pieces of bread, can be enough to induce that. And certainly don't have anything. Everyone's like has chips with lunch and cookies with lunch or soda with lunch, like all that stuff. Try to have as minimal carbohydrate as you can. And the third is like, that's just the time of the day. So if at all possible, to give you all an example, I used to work from basically 10 to 8 every day. And the reason that I would work from 10 to 8 is, so I would schedule patients. Like a lot of patients want to come after 5 p.m. so they don't have to skip work. So I was like, well, what do I do about this? Do they like skip work? Like if I see people after 5 p.m., I can fill up. How do I do that? I can't work that long. People also want to come in the morning. So I just started taking 2 hours off in the middle of the day. Like 1 to 3, I'll fucking take a nap on that bad boy back there. So even if you can, from a workflow perspective, if you can swing it with your boss, I'd say if you get tired at 12 to 2, the last bit of advice is don't fight it. Just take a nap. Lay down for a little while. And then finish your work afterward. Because remember that the best cognitive activity happens at dawn and dusk. So even if you work around 5 p.m., 6 p.m., that's ideal in a lot of ways. Seriously. I was like, how do I avoid napping? Just nap. I'm hungry all the time. What should I do? Fucking eat. I'm thirsty all the time. Eat. I need to piss. No one is saying like, oh, I need to piss all the time. What should I do? No doctor's like, stop pissing. It's bad. But people are like, I'm sleepy all the time. And everyone's like, don't go to sleep. I'm hungry all the time. Don't eat. I'm horny all the time. We'll leave that one. We're not going to touch that one. Right? So listen to your body. We're not saying give into it all the time. You don't want to eat every time you're hungry, and there can be... So it's kind of interesting. So there's a really interesting study that looked at certain coping mechanisms for people who overeat. And what they sort of found is that 40% of overeating is psychological. 60% of it is biological. So if I solve someone's psychological problems, it'll improve their overeating behavior by about 40%. So that's where, like, absolutely work on that stuff. I'm not saying you should chow down with everything that you need, but whatever psychological eating you should do, you should fix that. But the rest of it, like, sometimes people are just hungry. Sometimes people have small stomachs. Sometimes people have digestive capacity that is not very robust to where you can't handle one meal a day. Great question. Why does tea or coffee calm me down emotionally when I have ADHD? This is super cool. So you look at ADHD, their minds are moving too fast, right? I get distracted. I'm thinking about this. I'm hyperactive. I'm fidgeting, And what is the medication that we tend to give people who have ADHD? Stimulants. Wait, but if they're moving too fast, why am I stimulating them? Or more importantly, what part of the brain am I stimulating? What I'm stimulating with people with ADHD is the brakes. I'm hyperactivating the part of your brain that controls the other parts of your brain. This is why tea or coffee helps people with ADHD calm down. It hyperactivates your frontal lobes, which then control or suppress your emotional circuitry. So it's kind of weird, but we actually want to hyperactivate people with ADHD, not slow them down. We're going to strengthen the brakes. Cool, huh? Gotta understand science, chat. Okay. Why not use inhibitants? Because it doesn't work. That's why we don't use inhibitants. Right? So there are clinical trials on things like benzodiazepines for ADHD, and they just don't work. They don't work nearly as well as stimulating your frontal lobes. That's why we do it that way. For whatever reason, with this particular condition in the brain, this is the thing that yields the most consistent and best result. So does cannabis have the opposite effect? Y'all tell me. When y'all motherfuckers with ADHD get high, what does it do to your ADHD? Let's do a poll. I don't know. Usually once, I know that people aren't always around. I'm not, oh my God, how do I, here we go. Okay, let's do a quick poll. All right, chat? And okay, new poll. What impact does ADHD have, THC have on ADHD? Makes it better, makes it worse. Okay, I don't use THC, I don't have ADHD. All right, let's take a look. Okay. Right, so now this is really interesting. So we're seeing that 19% of people say that THC makes their ADHD better. And 16% of people say it makes it worse. Now, this is the point where maybe, okay, it looks like it's just about 50-50. But this is an interesting finding, which is that here's Dr. K, and Dr. K thought that cannabis would make ADHD worse. And I'm still pretty sure it does. But let's, instead of taking the data from y'all fucking potheads who love your pot and don't want to give it up and don't want to give me ammo to tell you to stop smoking. I see what's going on here. Don't get me wrong. I can see through it. But let's take this. So this is really important when we're being scientific, is that I don't get to say like, oh, this is bad data, right? That's not okay. When there's some kind of poll, you just don't get to discount the poll because it doesn't agree with what you believe, right? So let's understand why this could be. So here's another question that I have for y'all. For people, okay, so this is for those of y'all that THC helps ADHD. What does it help? Helps me focus. Hold on, let's see. Slows down my mind. Helps with my emotions, helps me sleep. Makes me less impulsive. So let's see if we can figure out what is the neuroscientific mechanism of this. All of the above. Okay. So it's still important what people resonate with. So what I would kind of say, so it looks like 66% of people, they have this experience of slowing down their mind. So this is interesting. So I promise y'all this for sure. I'm going to take a look at whether there have been recent studies. Actually, let's just do it now. Let's take a look at whether there have been recent studies that show whether ADHD actually has THC has positive effects on ADHD. All right, so let's just be THC ADHD treatment. Okay, interesting. Let's go to this one instead. Okay. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is characterized by attention deficits, blah, blah, blah. The purpose highlight that people with ADHD can benefit in some cases of consumption. A 28-year-old male who showed improper behavior. Ooh. So Twitch chatter. And appeared very maladjusted and inattentive while sober. Ooh. Epic Twitch chatter. Appeared to be completely inconspicuous while having a high plasma level of delta-9 THC. Performance tests, which were conducted with the test batteries, provided sufficient and partly over-average results in driving-related performance. Driving-related performance? What the hell? Okay, this is what we call... We can't extrapolate anything from this, chat. This is one dude who's a complete degenerate for whom things got better when they... This is a case review, okay? So this doesn't mean anything. So this is where, like, I'm going to say, like, this is... You know, they say very maladjusted. Let's see if they go into... numerous violations of traffic. Addiction, personality disorders were absent, okay? Okay, so it looks like this is like a case of one person that it helped some. So let's look at this review. This is good. Only one RCT, which showed no significant effect of cannabis on ADHD. Patients anecdotally report improvement in their symptoms of the cannabis. Fuck! That's what we call an uppercut, chat. That's an uppercut for the potheads. Evidence from self-reports of recreational cannabis users on the impact of cannabis on their attention are extremely low. Isolated effect of CBD on ADHD symptoms and pathophysiology is not well known. There's not enough evidence to recommend cannabis as a treatment for ADHD. So this is 2023. Okay. So now let's talk about this. So I'm still going to be on y'all's team, okay? So let's understand how cannabis can be useful for ADHD, right? So I recognize that. The first is anytime we use a substance to fix a problem, how much it fixes the problem depends on how bad the problem is. So basically, the more screwed up I am, the more likely something like a substance will help me more than it hurts me. So if I'm completely emotionally dysregulated, then using a substance that calms my emotions will be a net positive. Hell, we do this in clinical treatment, and it's called 5-2-50. When there is a patient who is completely dysregulated, homicidal, attacking other people, slamming their head into the ground, self-harm behavior, we give them a medication cocktail called 5-2-50. 5 of Haldol, 2 of lorazepam, and 50 of Benadryl. So in that situation, 5-2-50 helps this person. If I give any of y'all, or take it myself, 5-2-50, and I'm doing anything but trying to hurt someone or hurt myself, it will absolutely destroy whatever I'm trying to do. You cannot work 1 minute while that medication is floating through your system. So the thing about THC is that the worse off things are, the more likely THC will be helpful. And we see this in studies with, for example, chronic pain and opioid dependence. So when is THC helpful for pain conditions? It's helpful not when someone has it's helpful when people are using lots of opiates. So if I'm using a ton of pain medication, THC cuts it in half, let's say. That's a simplification. So if you have ADHD and THC is helping you, chances are your ADHD is very bad. And it doesn't mean that we want to keep you on it for an extended period of time. Now, what I would have hypothesized is that the way in which THC helps people with ADHD is emotional dysregulation. This is based on my read of the neuroscience, but apparently it's not, there isn't a whole lot of evidence, or y'all anecdotally don't support that very much. So we know that THC has an emotionally calming effect. We know that people with ADHD have emotional dysregulation. And the inability to control emotions is a huge part of ADHD and may even be a whole subtype that has its own like neuroscientific fingerprint or alterations in the brain. So that's what I would have predicted. But if we were to do one quick review, what it turns out is when people feel like THC helps their ADHD, the problem is that subjectively, you feel better and it makes you think that your mind is functioning better, but it looks like outcomes don't actually mirror that. So even though I feel more focused, I'm not actually able to like do more work or get higher grades on a test or whatever, if we look at that review, right? That's the implication of that review. But it also seems like there aren't many studies. There's like one RCT. So this is the kind of thing where if y'all get a benefit from THC and you've got ADHD, I would say there is a large reason to be skeptical. And at the same time, we're not omniscient and the research on it isn't actually that great. So it's very possible that THC does help people. But the more screwed up you are, the greater the chance is that the benefit outweighs the harm. And unfortunately, it seems like from a self-report standpoint, y'all feel like it helps a lot. But in terms of an outcome standpoint, it doesn't seem to make that much of a difference. So I wouldn't recommend using it. Sorry, chat. So we need more research? Absolutely. And this is where one thing I will say, when a large chunk of humans, patients, people with ADHD say this helps me, I'm actually more inclined to trust y'all than the research. So when I see very little research like this, I think there's very possibly some kind of real effect that is not captured or measured in the studies. That's very possible. That's what I honestly think is going on. Because if y'all say this helps a lot with my thinking, I think that's worth investigating. Right? And that's what we did. We did one poll and I was like, hold on a second. This is not what I thought. That doesn't mean y'all are fucking wrong. That means that, hold on a second, I may be missing something. Let's do another poll. I do have a hypothesis. Turns out that that hypothesis is not consistent with the data. So now there could be something else going on. Let's do some research. Right? That's how we should do things. Okay. So I see that there's a ton of questions about Russell, Barkley, stimulant use, stuff like that. So that's why we have the guide to ADHD. So like, I don't know how to say this, but if I streamed on ADHD once a week, I would answer the same questions over and over and over again because y'all may not be here next week and someone else. It's a really good question. That's why we built resources that have all of this stuff. But let's speed run a couple of these answers. The first is, should I use stimulants long term? So let's understand why psychiatrists prescribe medication. Psychiatrists prescribe medication to achieve a particular outcome given a circumstance. So if your situation is that I can't afford to go to therapy right now, I don't have time for therapy, I don't have time for bandwidth, I can't learn productivity skills, I need to get my mind to function in 15 minutes, then you should take a pill. Long-term stimulant use, I do not recommend. There isn't great evidence that it is harmful in any profound way. It seems to be the most harmful during development. But if you're like a 25-year-old and you get started on stimulants and you take them for 30 years, there isn't great evidence that that hurts you in a significant way. I'm not a fan of it. But the key thing to understand is that taking medication is more about your circumstance than it is about your brain. So with all mental illness, and when it comes to mental health, medication is a shortcut. Sometimes it's a necessity. I'd say in 30% of people, it's a necessity. But in 70% of people, it's because you can't afford to do the other stuff. I can't sleep 9 hours a day. I can't meditate every day. I can't optimize my gut-brain health so that my gut produces neurotransmitter precursors that will improve my brain health so that I will be less distractible and impulsive. I can't afford to go to therapy and work on my confidence and how that impacts my ADHD. If you can't do that stuff, then by all means use stimulants. But long term, I strongly, strongly recommend you try to do all of that stuff. And then some people will do all that stuff and they'll still need a stimulant, which is just your karma. It's not your fault. Your brain is just wired a particular way. And this is the other thing. The demands that your life puts on your brain, which by the way are very unnatural, right? So our brain did not evolve to sit in a classroom for 8 hours. It did not evolve to sit in front of a computer screen for 8 hours. It did not evolve to get a text message at 2 a.m. from your boss who's panicked because there's no one able to fill your shift tomorrow and can you come in? That's not what we evolved for. So the other problem is that half of the sickness that we see in the world today is a normal brain trying to adapt to an unhealthy society. And sometimes we just got to artificially manage that crap with meds. Hate to say it, but that's probably the truth. Like the number of kids that I've worked with ADHD, where like if they had the right kind of environment to be schooled, and that environment means learning outside, they would do so much better. Okay, you guys we've got time for one more. So, afraid of fixing my problems. Let me just think about this for a second and get some water. Like in the park, absolutely. Like learning outdoors. Cool. Pope Badger is saying, hello, Dr. K. I've seen you around, first time actually catching streams. Speaking of ADHD, I have it and have been on it for a couple months and it's helped a lot. Awesome. Any tips for severe tinnitus? I'm doing a deep dive. I don't know when. But man, we understand so little about tinnitus. And the problem with doing deep dive on tinnitus is like, I have to learn a lot of stuff. Like I can do a deep dive into trauma because I'm a psychiatrist. So I have a lot of background that helps me formulate the research. I haven't worked with 1,000 patients with tinnitus. So it's harder for me to feel good about it. Tips for getting someone with ADHD to wake up. Okay. So if you've got ADHD and you have trouble waking up, a couple of things to consider. The first is how you wake up depends. The most important factor for how you wake up is how you go to sleep. So when do you go to sleep? What is the progression of your sleep cycle? So if you have problems waking up, the most fundamental thing is the way that you sleep. So I would really think about your bedtime routine, whether you're using screens before bed. So that interferes with your REM sleep and the restfulness of sleep. Okay, so how you go to bed is super important. Being able to get a good night's sleep, whether you want to use something like a white noise machine to help you fall asleep, you want to listen to something like an audiobook, you may need some kind of stimulation to help you fall asleep, or use something like a weighted blanket. So that's number one. The second thing that makes it hard to sometimes wake up has to do with your sleep cycles. So our brain goes through a series of different stages. And if I wake you up at the wrong time, and you're in the wrong stage of sleep, you'll feel really, really groggy and it's hard to wake up. These cycles tend to be, let's say, about 90 minutes. So if you can catch yourself at the end of a cycle between the next one, so basically 90-minute intervals, then you'll be okay and you'll actually be able to wake up. So it's possible, and y'all may have seen this, where you can sleep for 5 hours and you can wake up and you can feel more rested than if you sleep for 8 hours like you're supposed to. So catching yourself at the right window in the sleep cycle is important. That requires a little bit of playing around with. So practically what that can mean is you can try to wake up even half an hour or 45 minutes earlier or half an hour or 45 minutes later, and it may be easier to wake up. The last thing to consider is that waking up is a lot about setting your circadian rhythm. So you just have to train your brain. If you wake up at the same time every day for like a month, you will train your brain to do that. And the last tip that I'd say is if you're trying to wake up in the morning, the closer you can get to dawn, the easier it will be. So if you're someone who goes to bed at midnight and wakes up at 8 a.m. for 9 a.m. class or work, what I would recommend is that you actually try to go to sleep 3 hours earlier and wake up 3 hours earlier. So go to sleep at 9 and wake up at 5 a.m. That may actually be more circadian rhythm conducive, and it'll become way easier. And the beautiful thing is this is also really great for people with ADHD. When you get home after a day full of work, you can't do anything if you've got ADHD. You're just wiped. Or forget about having ADHD, just that's for everybody. So you can oftentimes, the crap that you want to get done, you should get done before you go to work. Because you can always work, right? Once you get there, you kind of board the train and you'll be fine. Okay? So a couple of tips about waking up with ADHD. Last thing is you can do things like use alarm clocks and stuff like that. Right? So I sort of like, even when I was starting HG, I was like doing a lot of like research and a ton of writing. So I wrote a book on video game addiction. And what I found is that I could write in the morning and then see 8 hours of patients, but I couldn't see 8 hours of patients and then write for 3 hours. It was just too emotionally exhausting to see patients for 8 hours and do like psychotherapy. But I could like write, and then like the patient sitting in front of me brought out the best out of me. And that's how I ended up working 11 or 12 hours a day instead of like working 8 hours a day. And all I had to do, I was the same amount of tired working 11 or 12 hours a day or 8 hours a day. All I did was change the order of how I work. So what is the kind of work that you do that is cognitively exhaustive, emotionally draining? What is the kind of work that you can still do a pretty good job even if you're pretty tired? And really think about structuring your day. And usually it's creative work in the morning, and then like meetings and crap. Like a meeting at 3 p.m. is going to be boring as fuck if you started work 2 hours ago or 12 hours ago. Doesn't matter. It's still going to be boring. You're going to be tired at the end of that no matter what, right? So don't try to do creative work after like your slog of meetings. Yeah, so this is how you min-max the circadian rhythm. Well said, Angel. Is training your circadian rhythm even possible with delayed sleep phase disorder? Yes, I think so. The problem is that delayed sleep phase disorder means that the circuitry to alter your circadian rhythm is like not tuned properly, right? So that's why you have a delayed sleep phase disorder, because there's a problem with that circuit to begin with. So is it harder? Absolutely. Is it possible? I think so. And even to the point of like some amount of the treatment for that is going to be like working with your circadian rhythm. You only allow PC questions, right? I don't know what that means, Master Demon, but generally speaking, we don't answer questions that violate terms of service. But like, I don't know what you mean by PC. Like if you have questions about erectile dysfunction, we can talk about that. We're here to offer medical education. If that makes sense. I mean, I appreciate the question. I mean, maybe the dude is trying to be sus or chick is trying to be sus. Okay, so how can I divide my fun PC time from work PC time? Oh, maybe they mean personal computer. Who knows? This is Twitch. I got a question about recreational PC time versus work PC time. No Xbox or PS questions. Discriminating against mobile Twitch viewers. Mobile users revolt. Okay, Tech Teller's right. Let's do one more Reddit post. I'm blanking Tech Teller on what I want to say, so I'm procrastinating. TBH. Oh man, there's good stuff here too. Okay. Give me a second, chat. I'm going to get some water. We're going to chair stream real quick, okay? I'm going to use the potty and I'm going to get some water. Okay. Revitalized, chat. All right, this is going to be good. Let's take a look at our next thing. All right. I'm afraid of fixing my problems. Have goals. Feel resistance to pursue those goals. Oh, like we got to fix that resistance. Journal to figure out the resistance. Feel resistance to journaling. GG, get wrecked, noobs. So, what's going on here? Sometimes we have goals. And we're actually afraid to succeed. We certainly have fear of failure. Like some of us will have this fear of failure. We're like, oh my God, I'm going to screw up. I'm going to screw up. And I want to put together my life. I want to be someone. I'm tired of being a nobody. So in order to be a someone, I got to go out there and succeed. And so you're like, yeah, I'm tired of being a nobody. And then you try to go out there and your brain is like, nope. Sit the fuck back down, son. We're not going to do that. And so then you're left with this kind of like paralysis of inaction. Where it's like, well, I'm tired of being a failure, but every time I try to go and be successful and fix my life, it's like, it's so hard. And then you muster up a bunch of willpower and you force yourself to apply for a new job and then you go to work. And then you ghost after 2 weeks or you get fired. And so then you get really confused because you're like, hold on a second. I understand that I'm afraid of failure, but why am I afraid of success too? Those are opposites. Like the fear of failure drives me to want success. So I want success, but then I try to become successful and I'm scared of that too. Like, but that's what I want. How can I be scared of what I want? The fear of failure is not the opposite of the fear of the success. It is actually the same damn fear. You can't be two things at once. It's the same damn thing, right? So when people say, oh, there's a thin line between love and hate, right? But they're opposites, right? No, they're not opposites. They're the same damn thing. And you may say, how are love and hate the same damn thing? They're both attachment. The connection to the other person is what causes those things. It doesn't matter what you're transmitting, but you're tightly connected. Y'all see that? So the fear of failure and fear of success aren't different. They're actually the same damn thing. And I'll explain to y'all how. So how do we learn how to fear failure? We fail. And once we start to fail, we're like, oh crap, failure is bad. And then we try to fix it. So we go and we try to succeed. And when we try to go and try to succeed, we succeed for a little while, and then what ends up happening? We end up failing. We don't follow through. Ended up dropping the ball anyway. And so at some point, our brain realizes that even when we succeed, we will inevitably fail. And so then something really interesting happens. Our brain has figured this out, because if you ask people who are afraid of success, like, why are you afraid of success? They're like, I don't know. And then you ask them, hey, in the past, when you've tried to put together your life, what ended up happening? I always screwed it up. It's the answer you're going to get. So even then, they succeeded. They got the job. They started dating someone. They went on their first date. They went on their second date, and it always falls apart. And so then if you're someone who's lived like this, you believe that, some part of you believes that even when other people succeed, you will screw it up. And then your brain, by the way, doesn't do things to screw you. Your brain works to help you. It's like, bruh, you really want those like Doritos or whatever that, like, you're like hungry. Like, I'm gonna hook you up with like a 2,000 calorie burger. Take care of that hunger. I'm going to take care of it for you, son. You're feeling bad about yourself, and like you feel like you're a piece of crap. Like, let's go look at pictures of your ex. I'm going to help you feel like a piece of crap. That's what you want to feel like, right? You're beating yourself up. I'm going to help you. Let's go look at how your ex is out there living their life and you're still a POS. I'll help you out. When your brain fears success and fears failure, it's trying to protect you from the failure that is going to come after the success. Because it believes, actually, it doesn't believe, you believe that you're destined to fail. And it's like, okay, brah, if you're destined to fail, I'm going to protect you by not trying. I'm going to help you out. I'm going to do you a solid. So anytime you have a consistent thing that the brain does that screws you over, it's not a problem, it's a solution. We just don't know it, right? And that's what's so confusing. It's actually the same damn thing. It's fear of failure, fear of success. And if y'all have this problem, the first thing that you've got to do is you've got to ask yourself, in the past when you started, because if I ask you if in the past when you succeeded, what happened? You're not going to think about it as succeeded. So we have to change the question. In the past, when you started to move in the right direction, what happened? And if your answer is, I screwed it up, this is why you fear success. Because what the fuck, right? Because even if you succeed, what's going to happen? I'll give you all a really simple example. I need to get a job. I need to become financially independent. I really need a job. So I'm going to apply for a job. And then I ask you, do you want the job? Hell nah. Do you want to go into work every day and work retail or food service or medicine or finance? Is that what you want? No. I hate it here. And then you're like, oh my God, my brain won't let me apply for a job. So think a little bit about what you actually want. Think about what your experience in the past has been when you force yourself to do stuff that you don't want to do. When you force yourself into making progress, chances are you're going to shoot yourself in the foot. Because real progress comes from some amount of forcing yourself, and I'm not saying that y'all shouldn't do that. But it also comes from things like inspiration. Right? There's a huge difference between seeking out a relationship because the loneliness is crushing. That's a relationship that could be doomed to failure because The relationship is giving you is satisfying an emotional need. It's not about the relationship itself. You are getting something out of the relationship that a relationship is not supposed to provide. Versus falling in love, which is a completely different relationship. I'm with this person because I'm tired of being alone. Versus I'm with this person because I like this person. Huge difference. So oftentimes when we go chasing success, we are looking for success not because we actually want something to do with that, because we're tired of feeling like a failure. And so it can be a step in the right direction, but it's not going to fix the problem. So really, start by asking yourself, in the past, when you've taken steps in the right direction, what happens? And then the question becomes, what are the conclusions that you draw about yourself after these events? And then ask yourself, when I strive to succeed, is this the crap that is resisting? And if you want to wonder why there's resistance to journaling, by the way, because why does your brain have resistance to journal? Because what's your brain's goal? Brain thinks, okay, if we apply for a job, we're going to screw it up anyway. So I don't even want to journal. What's going to happen if this dumbass journals? If this dumbass journals, he's going to figure out what's wrong with him. He's going to figure out what's wrong with him. Then we're going to apply to a job. We're going to get a job, and we're going to quit in 4 weeks anyway. Journaling doesn't help. Journaling just accelerates the problem and wastes a bunch of time anyway. The whole point is that we're doomed when we succeed. And no amount of journaling is going to fix that. So this is the other thing, is that when we feel stuck by some of this stuff, we're resistant to improvement. So I'll give you all an example, like working with people who've been traumatized by relationships. I don't want to go to therapy to become a better human being and get better at relationships. Why not? Because if I get better at relationships, I'm going to wind up in a relationship and I'm going to end up hurting them anyway because I'm so fucked up. If I go to therapy, all I'll end up doing is hurting more people. Literally what goes on in people's heads. And it's not crazy. It's logical. So Alfheim is saying, I hate my brain. I'm going to tell you something. Your brain does not hate you. Your brain loves you and it looks out for you the best that it can. Brain's on your side. You just have to understand why it's behaving this way. Once you understand why it's behaving this way, then we can do something about it. So if you're afraid of success and if you have resistance to solving your fear of success, you really need to ask yourself, what happens when I succeed? And if the outcomes aren't good, that's the problem. So then if you want to fix that, what you have to do is tell your brain. You have to figure out that problem. Getting the job is not the problem. Figuring out how to not quit at 4 weeks or how to not ghost at 4 weeks, that's the problem. And that's what you need to fix. So if I can understand what goes on within me, what causes the pattern that turns the success into failure, if you can fix that and look into that, that is when you will no longer fear success. Because now your brain knows how to handle it. Oh crap, I'm terrified of drowning, but I can wear a life jacket. Now I no longer need to fear the water. So what is your life jacket for succeeding? Because we don't think about needing a life jacket when we succeed. That's when we think we're Gucci, but that's not the case. That's actually when we need the most help. Because you've demonstrated that you can do the first step. You can enter a relationship. You can find a job. It's just you screw it up afterward. And so we confuse the hard part with the easy part and the easy part with the hard part. So look into what causes a success to turn into failure and work on that, and then the fear will melt away on its own. Questions? Right? So the true Strando is saying, what if you're already successful and still afraid to see success? So there are a couple things about that. The first is you should still ask yourself, why am I afraid of success? But the most common reason why people are successful and still fear success is imposter syndrome. So when two kinds of humans. Some humans, when they succeed, feel better about themselves. And some humans, when they succeed, feel worse about themselves. When you are in the former category and you feel when successes make you feel better, that's when you become a normal human. If you're in the latter category, you become an imposter. And so what happens with imposters is despite their successes, they feel like they just slid by. They feel like they kind of fake it until I make it, but I'm never actually going to make it. They feel like they're going to get exposed. And so they start to fear bigger and bigger successes. Because if I sold them this line of BS to get me my first promotion, holy crap, I'm going to have to BS so much harder to get that next promotion. And as the responsibilities that I have to deal with grow and grow and grow, the chances of me becoming found or caught out is going to increase. I can't fake it the higher I go. And then if I'm responsible for running the whole company, like I can't fake it then because I don't have anyone telling me what to do. And there's one key thing that leads to imposter syndrome, which is when people do a good job, they credit circumstances or random stuff instead of effort. So if I got an A, it's because my parents have the math gene. If I get an A, it's because my parents hired a tutor for me. I only got this job because I'm an ethnic minority, whatever. And when they look at other people's successes, they do the opposite. This person got the job because they were working really hard. This person got the job because they got an A on the test because they worked really hard. So you ignore your own efforts and you highlight other people's. This is what leads to imposter syndrome. This is how people learn to fear success. And so what do you need to do? There's studies on this. You just need to flip it. So every time you do something good, all the random stuff, all the circumstance stuff is true. We're not saying don't believe that. Add a second column. What did I do to deserve this? Even though I got a math tutor, I still studied every day. Even though I may be an ethnic minority, I'm actually good at my job and I've done a good job. My last boss gave me a glowing reference, right? That's not just being an ethnic minority. That means that I'm also working. So it's about also. And even when you look at other people, add also. They worked really hard, and also, they happen to be the boss's son-in-law. Right? And so if you fear success, look for this dynamic in your mind and start to reverse it. I'm trying to catch up with comments, chat. Okay. Sock napkins is a random question. How do I keep momentum I have going when I seek out a new friend? I make these new friends, but the friendships seem to go away unless I constantly make myself known. They don't seem to seek out talking to me like I do with them. If you are the person who's carrying a lot of the weight of maintaining a relationship and you're trying to figure out how to stop, okay, so this is a situation of someone who puts a lot of effort into friendships. Some of us put a lot of effort into friendships. And if we stop putting in effort, the friendship falls apart. And then we're wondering, how can I fix this pattern? So the weird thing that you need to do is put in less effort. So the first thing is you've already learned that if I put in more and more effort, that maintains the relationship until I stop putting in effort, right? So more effort correlates with maintenance of the relationship. So very logically, you conclude that effort correlates with maintenance. How do I fix this? It sounds weird to go the opposite direction. So what I found is that any relationship that is established in a lopsided way is doomed to fail the moment the person stops putting in the extra effort. So when you carry the responsibility of the momentum early on in the relationship, the other person takes a back seat, right? So I had a friend that I would invite over like once a week or more, or like we'd hang out every week. But literally 99% of the time, the invitation came from me. And then I ran this little experiment where I was like, will I hear from this person? They showed up every week. Will I hear from this person if I don't invite them over? And I didn't hear from them. 1 week went by, 2 weeks went by, 3 weeks went by. I was like, hey, you want to hang out? And he's like, sure. And so it's kind of like if you have a roommate and you do the dishes all the time, and then you stop doing the dishes and the dishes start piling up, how can you fix that? The way you fix that is by making the relationship reciprocal at the beginning. Don't do more than 50% of the dishes, and then they will learn to pick up the slack. So in your attempt to maintain momentum, you're actually shooting yourself in the foot because you are taking the responsibility of the relationship on your shoulders. And us humans, we're lazy mofos. So somebody else takes the responsibility of something, I ain't going to take it too. So oddly enough, what you really need to focus on is at the very beginning. When you've lived with this pattern, you're paranoid about losing a relationship right at the very beginning. And so you end up doing a little bit more. That's what you need to stop. Right? So instead of investing in this relationship for 6 months that then disappears when you run out of energy because you're burnt out, hang out with someone once. And if they don't reciprocate in some way, shape, or form, don't hang out with them again. Move on to the next person. So instead of investing 6 months in one relationship, you can try out one person a week for 24 weeks. And some of those people will reciprocate. And those are the people that you foster relationships with. I'll leave y'all with one last quote. When I was in med school, there was a brilliant not in a med school residency. I had a brilliant teacher who told me that the doctor who goes the extra mile for a patient goes a mile too far. And I was like, I'm confused. I thought as doctors we're supposed to go the extra mile, do everything to save lives, bruh. And then what he told me is that the more work you do for the patient, the less they're going to do. So if a patient misses their appointment and you're like, yeah, I can rearrange my day and you can come by at 5 p.m., it's okay. I'll push back my dinner plans because I want to be a good doctor and you're sick and I don't want to abandon you because you're suicidal. You missed your appointment. What's going to happen? What's the behavior you're reinforcing as a doctor in that situation? Is that, hey, if you lose track of time, I'm going to bend my schedule around you because you're ill. And the more you do that, the more they're going to do that. So going the extra mile, even in a friendship, can sometimes be going too far. Now, that's not always the case. The key thing is, don't we want to go the extra mile in a friendship? Absolutely. If the person we go the extra mile for will go the extra mile for us. The basic problem with half of y'all is that y'all go the extra 10 miles for a relationship when that person is not even willing to go a single mile for you. And sometimes we mean physically. I've seen people in romantic relationships where one person always does the hour-long drive there and the hour-long drive back. And the other person can't be bothered because I have so much shit to do that you need to spend 2 hours driving to come and see me. So the short answer is if you're in a relationship, don't go the extra mile. Just go the mile that you're supposed to go and let them meet you halfway. That's how you break out of this pattern. What about current relationships that went on for years? Well, let them go. If you want to, you can have a conversation with them. You can say, hey, I've noticed that like over the past couple of years, like, I'm not blaming you for this, but I just want to understand if your experience is similar. I do feel a little bit resentful about it that like, if I don't text you, I'm not going to hear from you. I feel like I'm carrying more than 50% of the weight of this relationship. What does it feel like to you? Would you agree, disagree? And that's where like you want to listen to what they have to say. So, for example, human beings always think that they're doing more than 50%. So any marriage, someone once told me that marriage is 60-40. Dude has to do 60. Well, this is heteronormative days, right? So back in the 90s. Woman has to do 40. And all the dudes out there are like, oh man, men's rights. That's right. Same person said, wives have to do 60%, husbands have to do 40%. The only way you have a successful marriage is when both people are putting in 60 and both people are taking out 40. Doesn't matter about husband, wife. 2 dudes, 2 women, 2 non-binary, whatever. This is the perception. So when you approach a relationship, you can feel like you're doing more than half. The other person probably feels like they're doing more than half too. But sometimes you'll have a really healthy conversation. Like people say, yeah, I'm socially anxious, or like, I feel like I'm bothering you when I text you. So I don't text you because I feel like I'm bothering you. And I know that you're super busy. Right? So there may be a whole other side of the story that you can uncover. Okay. I think we're at time, chat. We're a little bit over, actually. I got to run. But this was great. So many good questions. Man, I miss y'all, chat. Really. This is fantastic. I miss y'all. Like, we're going to do this more. I think we may even stream on Wednesday, actually, chat. Y'all are working so hard. Holy shit. It ain't easy living life. Just living is the hardest part, man. Like friends, like, there's like challenges in life, like COVID and going to the moon and inventing a cancer medicine. But y'all out here just trying to make a friend. Like out here trying to just eat a serving of fruit every day. And I think that like we don't really, and I think what's happened is like that, I don't think that's changed. I think the problem was that in the past, you could half-ass it and the world was so full of plenty that you could half-ass it and get away with it. And now everything has been squeezed dry. So if you go back to like the 1950s or 60s, someone could like get a college degree or not even get a college degree, get hired by one company. And it's not like all these people were knocking it out of the park all the time. There was just a land of plenty. So you could work 9 to 5. You could leave your work at work. You could come home and you could support a family of 4 on a single person salary. And it's not like everyone there was a genius, that was good enough. You could have a house, you could buy 2 cars, you could send your kid to college, you could retire at a reasonable age, you could take a vacation or 2 or a cruise every year. Now everything has been squeezed dry for y'all. There's a lot of evidence that we don't have a mental health crisis. What we really have is an economic crisis that is manifesting as a mental health crisis. Because when you don't have a future, which part of the human is affected? The kidneys aren't affected. The lungs aren't affected. The mind is affected. It's no coincidence that we learned about PTSD from Holocaust survivors and people in the Holocaust, concentration camps. These are circumstances that inflict psychological damage. And the one thing that I think we've really missed out on in this current mental health crisis is that we've lost sight of the circumstances that impose this. We see it with video game addiction, where I've seen so many clinicians. Kids come in, they meet criteria, they check the boxes for anxiety or depression. They meet this scientific standard of evidence-based medicine. If you become a therapist today or a psychiatrist today, no text is going to tell you when you're learning how to interview a patient to ask about gaming. Maybe they do now. They certainly didn't 10 years ago, and I suspect they still don't. There are texts called like psychiatric interview that teach people how to do psychiatric interviews. I don't think they tell you to ask about gaming. They don't tell you to ask how many hours a day do you spend doom scrolling. It's not a part of the interview. And so people get diagnosed with depression and anxiety. They get started on things like SSRIs and they get sent home and y'all fucking doom scroll. But so much of mental illness is born out of circumstance and the way that we respond to it. And so what's happening is this is a situation where, like, if you look at cancer clusters, where 1,000 people in this small town get cancer. Why? Because there's an environmental exposure, like asbestos, right? Which creates a very specific kind of lung cancer called mesothelioma. And fixing mesothelioma is not about advancing chemotherapy or radiation therapy or surgical things. It's about having people stop breathing asbestos. But we have not made this jump when it comes to mental health. We're still at the point where there are 1,000 people who are addicted to technology, or 10,000 or whatever. Literally 9% of the population under the age of 18 may be addicted to video games. 10%. Alcohol is like 5 to 6%, which is the biggest addiction. We have an addiction that's growing in our society that's twice as big as any other addiction. And we're not asking ourselves why. What's the circumstantial cause? Blistic is saying, why not both? You're right. We absolutely are and should do both, right? So we should do clinical trials. We should understand, we should develop psychotherapy protocols that will help people with technology addiction, 100%. There are some medications that help with technology addiction, like bupropion, for example, has good outcomes. So we should use all those things. So I'm not saying we should stop developing cancer treatment, but we can treat a bunch of mesotheliomas and we can also prevent them from happening in the first place if we understand what's going on in the environment. Yeah, so burnout should be properly addressed. So that's the other thing. So if you guys want to hear a real tragedy is the story of burnout in the world. So here's the tragedy of burnout. Burnout happened. There was someone who came up with the term burnout and said, hey, there's something going on that is not depression, but looks like depression. And then everyone started looking at burnout. And what people realized is that people who are less likely to burn out are more resilient. Makes sense, right? And so then the antidote to burnout became being more resilient. And so we took a generation of people who were burnt out and we told them to meditate more. You now get access to a free subscription from a meditation app. And people who created a work environment shifted the responsibility of burnout onto the individual. It's not the hours that we work. It's not the deadlines that we give you. It's that you are not resilient enough, so let's have a workshop that will help you build your resilience. So you're going to work a full day, and then you're going to go to a 2-hour workshop twice a week for 8 weeks from 5 to 7 to teach you to be more resilient. Because you, fucker, are not resilient enough, and that's the problem. I ran those workshops, run by the Benson Henry Institute at Harvard Medical School for like 1.5 to 2 years. So first thing that I said is you can't do the workshop after hours. People need to be excused from work during the workshop. Rule number 1, minimum of getting people engaged. And on the flip side, this whole anti-work movement arose. And everyone said, toxic workplace, toxic workplace, toxic workplace. Your workplace is toxic. My boss said this to me. Everyone on the internet is like, fuck them. You didn't do anything wrong. Your boss did something wrong. So then what all the people did is shift the blame purely to the toxic workplace. And now what you've got is the workplace is blaming the person and the person is blaming the workplace. So if you really look at the science of burnout, what you find is it is relational. It is a connection between a person and a workplace. And this is why we get such good outcomes in career coaching. So I'll give you all just a simple example of what we uncovered. My boss texts me at 10 o'clock at night and asks me for stuff. This is burning me out. So then we ask our client, what do you do when they text you? Do you set limits with them and do you say, hey, it's after hours, I'm happy to get to it first thing tomorrow morning? No, I don't say that. Why don't you say that? Because I'm conflict avoidant and I'm afraid of what they're going to think of me. And I want to be seen as a team player. So you never, and then how is your boss supposed to know that you're bothered by this? Because some people aren't. Well, I don't know. It's toxic. So what we sort of stumbled into, and we've done this like when we work with creators too, right? So we like dug deep. So the reason we learned this stuff is we started working with creators and we realized burnout is a huge problem. It's not depression, it's not anxiety. But what we realized that there are some internal things, some internal vulnerabilities, which will intersect with a particular environment, whether it's content creation or a corporate job or even a family. And this is what leads to burnout. So are there things that need to change in the workplace? Absolutely. So there's a lot of research shows that, for example, repeated deadlines that are really, really tight and lack of clarity in what your job role is are two things that really drastically increase burnout, right? So when you're in one of these workplaces where your job role keeps changing every week, and like they're like, I need it done now, and now I need you to drop what you were doing earlier. I need this done now. That's what leads to burnout. So workplaces need to work on that. And also, if you're in that kind of situation every week, going to your boss, mastering your fear, role-playing your conversation with your coach about how to say this in a way that comes across as professional and positive, and saying to your boss, hey, for the last 3 weeks, I've been told to like shift what I need to do because of changing priorities. I'm happy to do whatever needs to be done, but I'm noticing that like I'm constantly putting out fires, so I can't do the work that you hired me to do. Please tell me what you want me to focus on. Do you want me to focus on putting out fires? Because this other stuff just isn't going to get done. And I want to let you know that. Right? And it's not because I'm not doing it. It's because when are you expecting me to do it if I'm putting out this fire? I'm looking for your help to figure out what are you expecting from me and what should I be focused on. I'm not blaming you for this. Just guide me. What do you want me to do? Do you want me to focus on this or do you want me to focus on this? And if they say both, and you can say which one is more important. And they can say they're both more important. You can say, I understand that. That's clear. What I mean is, when I show up to work tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., which of those do you want me to work on? And when do you want me to switch over to the other one? Do you want me to give 4 hours to both? I can do that. Or do you want me to wait until it's done and then switch over? Right? So being able to like interact with your workplace is huge. Yeah, and sometimes people will say just do both. Right? And then you can only say things so many times before you realize it's falling on deaf ears, and that's when you polish up your resume and you apply for other jobs. Right? The anti-work folks will have told you to do that at the very beginning, which is fine. And we've certainly even like, I've been in situations like that where even then, like, it's an issue of understanding, okay, how long is this going to be going on? Where there can be like tough times, and then you can tell people like, yeah, I know it's a shit show now. Do the best that you can. And hopefully like 4 months, because we'll also coach people who are bosses, right? Who are like CEOs and stuff. So how as a CEO, do you communicate this to people? You can say, hey, I know everything's a shit show right now. I know that a lot of job priorities are all over the place. And we know that y'all are working really hard. We're hoping, here's our strategy. Here's our timeline. We're hoping that in 2 months, this will have gotten better. After 2 months, if it's not better, please let us know. And even doing that and letting the people at work understand that you understand that this is not normal, that you recognize that this is a thing that you are working on from the top down and everyone's working on it. Right? And that's like where it helps a lot. right? So I want y'all to think about if you've had a boss who's come to you and said, hey, I know that you're getting crushed. It's not okay. I'm working on it. Here's the timeline. Here's the circumstance. Here's my strategy. Does this sound okay to you? Is quiet quitting a good strategy against burnout? Sure, it's a good strategy against not burnout too. But I don't think that quiet quitting is I think it helps to understand what the psychological drives are that make it hard for you to quiet quit. Because I think the best situations are when you have psychological drives that help you overperform and your work environment recognizes those and hopefully supports you or at least acknowledges them. Okay. Who are we rating, chat? And thank you very much to the Saberlight Raiders. If y'all are still around. You guys want to raid Dantes? What is Grubby doing? We can raid Alveus. Dantes? Okay. Y'all tell me. It's whatever y'all want to do, bruvs. Okay. Godspeed, y'all. Take care, everybody. I think we're streaming on Wednesday, presuming that we don't have something fall apart. Take care, y'all. Boom.